The superphysical gnosis. In this utilitarian epoch, and given the multitude of contemporary assertions, it is altogether natural that individuals who learn of transcendentalism should immediately pose the inquiry, by what means may we verify for ourselves the veracity of such declarations? Indeed, it is observable as a distinguishing trait of the majority that they refuse to accept anything based upon faith or mere authority, desiring instead to depend exclusively upon their own discernment. Consequently, when a mystic attempts to expound upon the superphysical constitution of man, and upon the destiny of the human soul and spirit antecedent to birth and subsequent to death, he is immediately faced with this fundamental requisition. They appear to consider such doctrines significant only when one has demonstrated the method by which they may persuade themselves of its validity. This critical interrogation is entirely justifiable, and no genuine mystic or occultist would contest its equity. Nevertheless, it is regrettable that among many who proffer this demand, there resides a sentiment of skepticism or antagonism toward the mystic or any endeavor on his part to elucidate occult matters. This sentiment becomes particularly pronounced when the mystic intimates the manner in which the truths he has depicted may be achieved. For they maintain that whatsoever is true is demonstrable, therefore, substantiate to us that which you assert. They require that truth be something pellucid and simple, something that a common intellect might apprehend. Surely, they add, this knowledge cannot be the exclusive possession of a select few, to whom it is granted via special revelation. Thus, the authentic messenger of transcendental truth is frequently confronted by individuals who repudiate him, because, unlike the scientist, for instance, he can furnish no proofs for his assertions of a nature that they are capable of comprehending. Furthermore, there are those who circumspectly reject any information pertaining to the superphysical because, to them, it appears devoid of reason. Thereupon, they partially content themselves by claiming that we cannot obtain knowledge of that which lies beyond birth or death, nor of anything that cannot be perceived through our 5 ordinary physical senses. These represent but a few of the arguments and criticisms with which the messenger of a spiritual philosophy is currently confronted. Yet they are analogous to all those that compose the keynote of our era, and he who places himself at the service of a spiritual movement must recognize this condition quite clearly. For his part, the mystic is cognizant that his knowledge rests upon superphysical facts, which are to him just as tangible, for instance, as those forming the foundation of the experiences and observations described by a traveler in Africa or any alien land. To the mystic applies that which Annie Besant has articulated in her manual, Death and After. A seasoned African explorer would care but little for the criticisms passed upon his report by persons who had never visited that region. He might recount what he observed, describe the fauna whose habits he had studied, sketch the terrain he had traversed, and summarize its products and characteristics. If he were contradicted, derided, or corrected by untraveled critics, he would be neither ruffled nor distressed, but would merely leave them be. Ignorance cannot convince knowledge by the repeated asseveration of its nescience. The opinion of 100 persons regarding a subject of which they are wholly ignorant carries no more weight than the opinion of one such person. Evidence is fortified by many consenting witnesses, each testifying to his knowledge of a fact, yet nothing multiplied 1,000 times remains nothing. Herein is expressed the mystic's perspective on his own situation. He hears the objections raised on every side, yet he knows that for himself he possesses no need to dispute them. He realizes that his certain knowledge is being criticized by those who have not shared his experience, and that he stands in the position of a mathematician who has discovered a truth that can lose no value, even though 1,000 voices be raised in opposition. Then once again, the objection of the skeptics will arise. Mathematical truths may be proven to anyone. They will argue, and although perhaps you have indeed discovered something, we shall accept it only when we have ascertained its truth through our own investigation. Such individuals, then, have reason to consider themselves in the right, for it is clear to them that anyone who acquires the requisite knowledge can prove a mathematical truth, whereas the experiences professed by the mystic, if true, depend upon the special faculties of a few elect mystics, in whom they assume they are expected to believe blindly. For him who rightly considers this objection, all justification for the doubt immediately vanishes, and mystics can here employ the very logical reasoning of the skeptics themselves by emphasizing the truth that the path to higher knowledge is open to anyone who will acquire for himself the faculties by which he may verify the spiritual truths herein claimed. The mystic asserts nothing that his opponents would not also be compelled to assert, if they but fully comprehended their own statements. They, however, in making an assertion, often formulate a claim that constitutes a direct contradiction of that very assertion. Skeptics are seldom willing to acquire the necessary faculties to test the assertions of the mystic, preferring instead to judge him summarily, without regard to their own lack of qualification. The sincere mystic says to them, "I do not claim to be chosen in the sense that you imply. I have merely developed within myself some of man's additional senses in order to acquire the faculties through which it is possible to speak of glimpses into superphysical regions. These senses remain dormant within you and every other person until they are developed." Yet his opponents answer, "You must prove your truths to us as we presently exist." This immediately appears a difficult task, for they have not complied with the necessity of developing the dormant powers within them, and they remain unwilling to do so. Yet they insist that he shall provide them proofs, failing to perceive that this is exactly as if a peasant at his plough should demand of the mathematician the proof of a complex problem without undergoing the exertion of learning mathematics. This confused mental condition appears so prevalent, and its solution so simple, that one almost hesitates to speak of it, and yet it indicates a delusion under which millions of people continue to live at the present time. When explained to them, they always agree in theory, since it is quite as evident as the fact that 2 and 2 make 4, yet in practice, they continually act in contradiction. The error has grown to be second nature with many. They indulge it without realizing that they do so, and without desiring to be convinced of its fallacy, just as they set themselves against other laws that they should and would at all times recognize as embodying a principle of the simplest nature, if they but gave them unbiased consideration. It matters not whether the mystic of today moves among thinking artisans or within a more educated circle. Wherever he goes, he encounters the same prejudice, the same self-contradiction. One encounters it in popular lectures, in newspapers and periodicals, and even in the more learned works or treatises. Here we must recognize quite clearly that we are dealing with a consensus of opinion that amounts to a sign of the times, which we may not simply pronounce as incompetent, nor treat as a possibly correct yet unjust criticism. We must understand that this prejudice against the higher truths lies deep within the very essence of our age. We must clearly comprehend that the great successes and the immense advancement marking our era necessarily encourage this condition. The 19th century, in particular, possessed in the aforementioned respect a dark aspect to its wonderful excellences. Its eminence is founded upon discoveries within the external realm and the subjugation of natural forces for technical and industrial utilization. Such triumphs could only have been realized through the application of an intellect rigorously directed toward material consequences. Contemporary civilization stands as the culmination of the discipline of our senses and of that portion of the mental faculty engaged with the sensory world. Scarcely a single step taken within the bustling marketplaces of the modern era fails to demonstrate the extent of our indebtedness to this specific mode of cultivation. Furthermore, it is under the sway of these civilizational boons that the habits of thought, now predominant among our contemporaries, have evolved. Humanity continues to adhere strictly to the senses and the intellect, for it is through the agency of these faculties that it has attained its present stature. Individuals were instructed to discipline themselves to acknowledge as truth only those phenomena presented to them via the sensory organs or the rational intellect. Indeed, nothing is more prone to arrogate to itself the sole valid testimony, the exclusive absolute authority, than the mind and the senses. Should an individual have attained a certain degree of cultural refinement through their agency, he subsequently accustoms himself to subject all matters to their adjudication and criticism. Moreover, in a separate sphere, that of the social domain, we discern a parallel characteristic. The individual of the 19th century insisted, in the most complete sense, upon the absolute liberty of personality and repudiated any external authority within the social commonwealth. He strove to organize the community in such a manner that the complete independence and self-determined vocation of each individual might be assured without impediment. Consequently, it became customary for him to evaluate all matters from the perspective of the average individual. This very individuality proves advantageous in the pursuit of knowledge upon the spiritual plane, for the higher faculties lying dormant within the soul may be cultivated by one person in a specific direction and by another in a divergent manner, One aspirant may achieve greater advancement, while another achieves less. Yet as they unfold these powers and ascribe significance to them, individuals begin to distinguish themselves from one another. Subsequently, one must concede to the advanced student a greater authority to discourse upon the subject, or to act in a specific fashion, than to one who is less progressed. This distinction is more imperative in matters of the higher realm than on the plane of the senses and the intellect, where experiences are largely uniform. It is also evident that the present configuration of the social commonwealth has precipitated a revolt against the higher faculties of man. According to the mystic, civilization during the 19th century advanced exclusively along physical lines. Consequently, humanity has accustomed itself to operate solely upon the physical plane and to feel entirely established therein. The higher powers are cultivated only upon planes superior to the physical, and the knowledge conferred by these faculties remains, therefore, unknown to the purely physical man. One need only attend public assemblies to be convinced that the speakers therein are utterly incapable of conceiving thoughts other than those pertaining to the physical plane and the world of sense. This limitation may also be discerned among the leading journalists of our periodicals. Indeed, on all sides, one observes the most arrogant and absolute repudiation of everything that cannot be visually perceived, tangibly grasped, or comprehended by the average intellect. We do not censure this disposition, for it signifies a necessary stage in the evolution of humanity. Without the pride and prejudices of the intellect and senses, we should never have secured our great conquests over material existence, nor have been able to bestow a certain measure of elasticity upon the personality. Neither could we anticipate that many ideals, which must be predicated upon man's desire for liberty and the assertion of personality, might yet be realized. Nevertheless, this shadow aspect of a purely materialistic civilization has profoundly affected the entire being of modern man. For verification, it is unnecessary to refer to the patent facts already cited. It would be readily demonstrable, through specific examples, how deeply rooted in the modern mind is this adherence to the testimony of the senses and the average intelligence. And it is precisely these factors that underscore the necessity for a renewal of spiritual life. The fervent response evoked by Professor Friedrich Delitzsch's Babel and Bible theory fully justifies a reference to its author's mode of thought as a significant sign of the times. Professor Delitzsch has elucidated the relationship of certain traditions in the Old Testament to the Babylonian accounts of creation. This fact, emanating from such a source and in such a form, has been recognized by many who would otherwise have ignored such inquiries. It has prompted many to reconsider the traditional concept of revelation. They inquire of themselves, how is it possible to accept the notion that the contents of the Old Testament were revealed by the divine, when we discover remarkably similar conceptions among distinctly heathen nations? This dilemma cannot be further elaborated upon in this context. Delitzsch encountered numerous opponents who feared that, through his exposition, the very foundations of religion had been undermined. He has offered a defense in a pamphlet entitled Babel and Bible, a retrospect and a forecast. Here we shall cite but a single statement from that publication. It is a statement of significance, for it reveals the perspective of an eminent scientist regarding the stance of man with respect to transcendental truths. Moreover, countless individuals today think and feel in precise accord with Delitzsch. The statement affords an excellent opportunity for us to ascertain the innermost convictions of our contemporaries, expressed unreservedly and therefore in their truest form. Delitzsch addresses those who reproach him for a somewhat liberal application of the term revelation, and who would prefer to regard it as a species of ancient priestly wisdom possessing no relevance to the layman. Offering this rejoinder, for my part, I am of the opinion that while we or our children receive instruction in school or at church regarding revelation, not only are we within our rights, but it is our duty to reflect independently upon these profound inquiries, possessing, as they do, an eminently practical dimension, if only that we might avoid providing our children with evasive responses. For this very reason, it will prove gratifying to many seekers of truth when the dogma of the special election of Israel shall have been brought into the light of a broader historical perspective through the synthesis of Babylonian, Assyrian, and Old Testament research. Furthermore, it would appear to me that the only rational course is for church and school to be content. regarding the entire past history of the world and humanity, with the belief in one almighty creator of heaven and earth, and that these narratives of the Old Testament should be classified distinctly under some such title as Old Hebraic myths. What then is here averred with such guileless simplicity? Nothing less than that the intellect engaged in physical investigation may claim the prerogative of adjudicating experiences of a superphysical nature. There is no consideration given to the possibility that this intellect, without further development, may be ill-equipped to contemplate the teachings of these revelations. When one desires to comprehend that which manifests as a revelation, one must employ the specific mode of knowledge or forces through which the revelation itself was conveyed to us. He who cultivates within himself the mystic faculty of perception soon observes that, in certain narratives of the Old Testament designated by Delitzsch as Old Hebraic myths, there are revealed truths of a higher nature than those comprehensible to an intellect concerned solely with sensory phenomena. His own experiences will compel him to recognize that these myths have emanated from a mystic perception of transcendental truths, and subsequently, in a singular moment of illumination, his entire perspective is transformed. Just as one cannot demonstrate the fallacy of a mathematical proposition by ascertaining the identity of its initial solver, or indeed by noting that multiple individuals arrived at the solution, so too is it impossible to impugn the veracity of a biblical narrative through the discovery of analogous accounts elsewhere. Rather than demanding that every individual assert a right, or indeed a duty, to exercise independent thought regarding the so-called revelations, we ought instead to consider that the authority to adjudicate upon such matters belongs solely to him who has cultivated within himself those latent faculties which render it possible to relive that which was once realized by those very mystics who proclaimed these supersensible revelations. Herein lies a quintessential example of how the pedestrian intellect, though qualified for the supreme triumphs of practical sensory knowledge, establishes itself, with naive arrogance, as an arbiter in domains the very existence of which it disdains to acknowledge. For purely historical investigation is conducted exclusively through the medium of sensory experience. In precisely this manner, the investigation of the New Testament has conducted us into an impasse. At all costs, the methodology of the newer historical investigation was compelled to be directed upon the Gospels. These documents have been compared with one another and brought into relation with a plethora of records that we might ascertain what genuinely transpired in Palestine from the year 1 to the year 33, how the historical personality recounted therein actually lived, and what he may, in truth, have uttered. Angelus Silesius, of the 17th century, has already articulated the entirety of the critical stance regarding this mode of investigation. Though Christ were yearly born in Bethlehem, and never had birth in you yourself, then were you lost forever. And if within yourself it is not reared again, the cross at Golgotha can save you not from pain. Nor are these the utterances of a skeptic, but rather those of a Christian, steadfast in his faith, and his equally fervent predecessor, Meister Eckhart, remarked in the 13th century, "There are some who desire to behold God with their eyes as they behold a cow, and just as they love a cow, so do they desire to love God." Simple-minded individuals imagine that God may be perceived as if he stood there and they stood here. But this is not so. In that perception, God and I are one. These assertions must not be construed as being directed against the investigation of historical truth. Yet no one can rightly comprehend the historic veracity of such documents as the Gospels unless he has first experienced within himself the mystical significance they contain. All such comparisons and analyses are utterly devoid of value. For no one can discover who was born in Bethlehem, save for he who has mystically experienced the Christ within himself. Neither can anyone, in whom it has not already been erected, determine how it is that the cross at Golgotha can deliver us from pain. Purely historical investigation can ascertain no more concerning the mystic reality than the dismembering anatomist, perhaps, can discover the secret of a great poetical genius. He who possesses clear vision in these matters is aware of how deeply rooted, in the present epoch, is the pride of the intellect, which concerns itself solely with the facts of the senses. It declares, "I do not wish to develop faculties that I may attain the higher truths. I wish to form my decisions concerning them with the powers I currently possess." In a well-intentioned pamphlet, which is composed, however, entirely in that spirit of the age which we have already indicated, we read as follows: "Christ, who symbolizes the life of the community, may be discerned within himself by the man of today. Out of his own soul, The man of today can create Christ just as effectively as the author of a gospel created him. As a man, he may place himself in the same position as the gospel writers, because he can reinstate himself into the same soul processes and can himself speak or write gospel. These assertions might be valid, yet they may also be entirely erroneous. They are true when understood in the sense of Angelus Silesius or Meister Eckhart, that is, when they refer to the development of powers dormant in every human soul, which, stemming from such a concept, endeavors to experience within itself the Christ of the Gospels. They are altogether incorrect if a more or less superficial ideal of the Christ is thus created out of the spirit of an age that acknowledges the veracity of no perceptions other than those of the senses. The life of the Spirit can be comprehended only when we do not presume to critique it with the lower mind, but rather when we develop it reverently within ourselves. No one can hope to acquire knowledge of the higher truths if he demands that they be lowered to the average understanding. This statement provokes the query, why then do you mystics proclaim these truths to individuals who, you declare, cannot as yet comprehend them? Why should there be movements for the furtherance of certain teachings, when the faculties which render men capable of conceiving these teachings are as yet undeveloped? It is the objective of this volume to elucidate this apparent contradiction. It will demonstrate that the spiritual currents of our day originate from a different source, and in a different manner, than the science which relies entirely upon the lower intellect. Yet notwithstanding this, these spiritual currents are not to be regarded as less scientific than the science which is predicated upon physical facts alone. Rather, they extend the domain of scientific investigation into the superphysical. We must conclude this chapter with one further inquiry, which is likely to arise. How may one attain to superphysical truths, and of what assistance are spiritual movements toward this attainment? Chapter 2. The Path of Veneration. Within every individual, there exist dormant faculties by means of which he may independently secure knowledge of the higher worlds. The mystic, the master, the theosophist, or the Gnostic discourses upon a soul world and a spirit world, which are, for him, possessed of a reality as tangible as the world that we perceive with our physical eyes, or contact with our physical hands. Furthermore, those who aspire to cultivate the spiritual senses, which reveal psychic insight, must comprehend that prudent counsel can be disseminated exclusively by those who have already developed such potency within themselves. Throughout the entirety of human existence, there have been confraternities and academies in which those endowed with these superior faculties have provided tutelage to those seeking them. Such institutions are designated as occult schools, and the instruction imparted therein is termed esoteric science, or occult teaching. This nomenclature occasionally gives rise to misconception. The auditor may be readily deceived into supposing that those who operate within these institutions seek to constitute an elite caste, which capriciously sequesters its knowledge from its fellow beings. Indeed, he may even surmise that perchance there exists a lack of substantial significance behind such knowledge, for he is inclined to postulate that, were it veritable wisdom, there would be no necessity for shrouding it in secrecy. One might simply disseminate it openly to the advantage of all mankind. Those who have been initiated into occult knowledge remain entirely unsurprised that the uninitiated should entertain such perspectives. Only he who has, to a specific degree, undergone this initiation into the higher knowledge of being can comprehend the arcanum of that initiation. But one might query, how then shall the uninitiated, given the prevailing conditions, cultivate any inclination whatsoever toward this ostensible mystic wisdom? How and why ought they to search for something of the nature of which they can conceive no notion? Such a question is predicated upon a wholly fallacious understanding of the true nature of occult knowledge. There exists, in truth, no essential disparity between occult knowledge and the remainder of human erudition and capability. This mystic knowledge is no greater an enigma to the ordinary individual than writing is a secret to one who has never acquired literacy. And precisely as everyone who selects the appropriate methodology may learn to write, so too can everyone who pursues the correct path become a disciple, and ultimately a teacher. In only a singular aspect are the conditions here divergent from those applicable to exoteric intellectual pursuits. The possibility of acquiring the art of writing may be denied to an individual through poverty, or through the cultural circumstances into which he has been born, yet for the acquisition of insight into the higher worlds, there exists no impediment for him who earnestly seeks it. It is a common persuasion that it is imperative to locate, in one place or another, the masters of the higher knowledge in order to obtain illumination from them. In the first instance, he who endeavors fervently after the higher knowledge need harbor no trepidation regarding any difficulty or obstacle in his search for an initiate who shall be capable of guiding him toward the more profound mysteries of the world. Conversely, everyone may remain assured that an initiate will locate him, under any circumstances, provided there exists within him a sincere and meritorious striving to attain this knowledge. For it is a rigorous statute among all initiates to deny no individual the knowledge that is rightfully his. However, there exists an equally stringent ordinance which mandates that no one shall receive any occult knowledge until he is deserving and adequately prepared. And the more rigorously he adheres to these two laws, the more perfect is an initiate. The fraternity encompassing all initiates is encircled, as it were, by a fortification, and the two laws mentioned herein form two potent tenets by which the components of this barrier are bound together. You may dwell in intimate camaraderie with an initiate, yet this wall will sever him from you for precisely as long as you have not become an initiate yourself. You may experience to the fullest degree the heart and the love of an initiate, yet he will divulge his secret to you only when you are prepared for its reception. You may offer him adulation. You may subject him to torment, yet nothing will compel him to reveal to you anything which he knows ought not to be exposed, insofar as you, at the current phase of your development, do not comprehend correctly how to receive the secret into your soul. The methods that precondition a man for the reception of such a secret are explicitly ordained. They are signified by the indelible, eternal characters within the temples where the initiates protect the supreme mysteries. In ancient epochs, antecedent to recorded history, these temples were externally perceptible. Today, because our existence has grown so devoid of spirituality, they are predominantly imperceptible to external sight. Yet they are ubiquitous, and all who seek may find them. Only within his own soul may a man unearth the agency that will unseal for him the lips of the initiate. To a specific elevated degree, he must develop particular capacities within himself, and then the supreme riches of the spirit become his own. He must commence with a certain foundational disposition of the soul. The student of occultism terms it the path of devotion, of veneration. Only he who sustains this demeanor can, in occultism, attain discipleship, and he who is versed in these matters is able to discern even within the infant the indications of incipient discipleship. There are children who gaze with religious reverence upon those whom they venerate. For such individuals, they harbor a respect which prohibits them from entertaining, even in the deepest sanctum of the heart, any notion of critique or opposition. These children mature into youths and maidens, who derive satisfaction when they are able to revere that which is worthy of veneration. From the ranks of such children are drawn numerous disciples. Have you ever hesitated before the door of some revered personage? And have you, on this your initial visitation, felt a sacred dread as you depress the latch in order to enter the room which for you is a sanctified space? Then there has been evidenced within you an emotion which may be the embryo of your future discipleship. It is a benediction for every evolving individual to possess such emotions upon which to construct. However, let it not be presumed that such qualities contain the germ of subservience and servitude. Experience teaches us that those can best maintain an upright posture who have learned to venerate where veneration is merited. And veneration is always appropriately situated when it emanates from the depths of the heart. If we do not cultivate within ourselves this profoundly entrenched sentiment, that there is something superior to ourselves, we shall never muster sufficient vigor to ascend toward something higher. The initiate has attained the capacity of elevating his intellect to the summits of knowledge only by directing his heart into the depths of veneration and devotion. The summits of the spirit can only be reached by traversing the gateways of humility. Man possesses the prerogative to behold the reality, but he must first merit this privilege. You can only attain true knowledge when you are prepared to value it. There are statutes within the spiritual existence, just as in the physical existence. Rub a glass rod with a suitable substance, and it will become electrified. That is to say, it will gain the capability of drawing minute particles. This illustrates a natural law. Similarly, if one is conversant with the primordial tenets of occultism, one knows that each sentiment of true devotion facilitates the cultivation of qualities which, sooner or later, conduct one toward the path of knowledge. He who harbors within himself this feeling of devotion, or who is sufficiently favored to derive it from his upbringing, possesses a substantial advantage when, later in life, he solicits entry to the higher knowledge. Conversely, he who is devoid of such foundational preparation will find himself confronted by impediments, even at the very threshold of the path of knowledge, unless he commits, through rigorous self-discipline, to engendering a devotional temperament within his own being. In the present epoch, it is of paramount importance that this particular requirement receive our undivided attention. Our contemporary civilization inclines far more heavily toward critique, the rendering of judgments, and similar intellectual habits than toward devotion or a selfless veneration. Our progeny are far more prone to criticize than they are to engage in worship, yet every judgment and every instance of captious criticism stifles the soul's faculties for the attainment of higher knowledge in precisely the same measure that sincere devotion cultivates them. In asserting this, we do not intend to disparage our civilization, nor to pass judgment upon its character, for it is to this very critical faculty, this self-conscious human discernment, this imperative to prove all things and hold fast to the good, that we are indebted for the grandeur of our civilization. We could never have achieved the science, the commerce, the industry, and the jurisprudence of our age had we not universally exercised our critical faculties and applied the standard of our judgment in every domain. However, that which we have thereby acquired in terms of external culture has exacted a price, a corresponding forfeiture of higher knowledge and of the spiritual life. It is now essential for everyone to comprehend clearly that, for the individual immersed in the objective civilization of the present day, advancing toward the knowledge of higher worlds presents a formidable challenge. He may achieve this only if he labors energetically within his own interior being. In an era when the conditions of external existence were simpler, spiritual exaltation was more readily attainable. That which warranted veneration, and that which demanded to be held sacred, stood in sharper relief against the mundane aspects of the world. In an epoch dominated by criticism, these ideals are significantly debased. Other sentiments usurp the place of awe, veneration, respect, and prayer. Our current age continually relegates these nobler emotions to the background, such that they play a negligible role in the daily existence of the populace. The seeker of higher knowledge must generate this state within himself. He must personally instill it into his soul. This cannot be accomplished through mere academic study. It can be realized only through living experience. Consequently, he who aspires to become a disciple must assiduously cultivate a devotional temperament. Everywhere within his environment, he must seek that which commands his admiration and homage. Whenever his duties or circumstances allow, he should endeavor to abstain entirely from all criticism or judgment. If I encounter a brother and censure him for his weakness, I divest myself of the power to attain higher knowledge, whereas, if I attempt to enter lovingly into his merits, I accumulate such power. The disciple should endeavor to benefit both himself and his fellows. Experienced occultists are cognizant of how deeply they are indebted to the persistent search for the good in all things, and to the withholding of all harsh criticism. This must not merely serve as an external rule of conduct, but must take possession of the innermost recesses of our souls. It lies within our power to perfect ourselves, and in due course to achieve a complete transformation. Yet this transformation must occur within the deepest self, in the sphere of mental life. It suffices not that I exhibit respect merely in my outward demeanor toward a person. I must harbor this respect within my very thoughts. The disciple must commence by integrating this devotion into his intellectual life. He must entirely banish from his consciousness all thoughts of disrespect and criticism, and he must endeavor immediately to cultivate thoughts of devotion. Every moment in which we resolve to expunge from our consciousness whatever vestiges remain of disparaging or suspicious judgment regarding our fellow men brings us closer to the knowledge of higher realities. Furthermore, we ascend rapidly when, in such moments, we permeate our consciousness exclusively with thoughts that evoke admiration, respect, and veneration for humanity and the world. He who possesses experience in these matters understands that, in every such moment, powers are awakened within man that would otherwise remain dormant. In this manner, the spiritual eyes of the individual are opened. He begins to discern things in his surroundings which, hitherto, he was unable to perceive. He begins to comprehend that, previously, he had beheld only a fragment of the world surrounding him. The individual with whom he comes into contact now reveals a vastly different aspect from that which was presented before. Naturally, through this single rule of life, he will not yet be capable of perceiving what has elsewhere been described as the human aura, for a yet higher training is requisite for that attainment. Nevertheless, he may ascend to that higher development if he has previously undergone a thorough discipline in devotion. Noiseless and unobserved by the outer world is the pursuit of the path of discipleship. It is not required that anyone should detect a change in the disciple. He discharges his duties as before, he attends to his affairs as usual. The transformation proceeds solely within the inner sanctuary of the soul, concealed from outward observation. Initially, the entire soul life of the individual is inundated by this fundamental wellspring of devotion for all that is truly venerable. His entire soul life finds its pivot in this devotional mood. Just as the sun, through its rays, vivifies all living things, so too in the life of the disciple does this reverence vivify all the perceptions of the soul. Initially, it is not easy for individuals to credit that feelings such as reverence, respect, and the like possess any relevance to their perceptions. This stems from the fact that one is inclined to regard perception as an isolated faculty, one standing in no relation to other occurrences within the soul. In reasoning thus, we fail to recall that it is the soul itself which perceives, and feelings are to the soul what sustenance is to the body. If we provide the body with stones in lieu of bread, its activity will cease. The case is identical with the soul. Veneration, homage, and devotion act as nutriment that renders it healthy and robust, specifically robust for the activity of perception. Disrespect, antipathy, and underestimation precipitate the starvation and withering of this activity. For the occultist, this fact is discernibly visible within the aura. A soul that harbors feelings of devotion and reverence affects a change in its aura. Certain yellowish-red or brown-red tints will vanish, and tints of bluish-red will supersede them, and thereupon the organ of perception opens. It receives intelligence regarding facts in its environment of which it hitherto possessed no knowledge. Reverence awakens a sympathetic power within the soul, and through this we attract similar qualities in the beings surrounding us, qualities that would otherwise remain concealed. Even more effective is the power that may be obtained through devotion when an additional sentiment is adjoined. One learns to surrender oneself less and less to the impressions of the outer world, and to develop in their stead a vivid inner life. He who flits from one impression of the outer world to another, who constantly seeks dissipation, cannot discover the path to occultism. Neither should the disciple blunt his sensibilities to the outer world. Rather, he should allow his rich inner life to indicate the direction in which he ought to yield himself to its impressions. When traversing a beautiful mountain district, the individual possessing depth of soul and richness of emotion undergoes experiences distinct from those of the man with meager emotions. Only that which we experience within ourselves reveals the beauties of the external world. One man voyages across the ocean, and only a few inward experiences traverse his soul. Yet another will hear the eternal language of the world spirit, and for him, the mysteries of creation are unveiled. One must have learned to govern one's own feelings and ideas if one wishes to develop any intimate relationship with the external world. Every phenomenon in that outer world is replete with divine splendor, yet one must have sensed the divine within oneself before one may hope to discover it without. The disciple is instructed to consecrate specific intervals of his daily existence to inward withdrawal, dwelling in silence and solitude. During such junctures, he must refrain from occupying himself with his own personal affairs, for such engagement would precipitate the exact contrary of the objective at which he aims. Rather, within these moments he is obligated to attend in absolute silence to the reverberations of that which he has experienced, to the tidings conveyed by the external world. Subsequently, within these periods of tranquility, every blossom, every creature, and every deed will disclose to him secrets previously unimagined. Thus, he shall ready himself to apprehend fresh impressions of the external realm, perceiving it as though through an altered gaze. For the individual who desires merely to savor one impression after another serves only to stultify the perceptive faculty. Conversely, he who permits that enjoyment to subsequently reveal truth to him thereby augments and educates that very faculty. He must exercise caution not simply to allow the enjoyment to resonate passively, as it were, but rather, renouncing any prolonged emotional gratification, he must commence working upon these pleasurable experiences through interior activity. The peril situated at this juncture is significant. Rather than laboring within oneself, it is facile to succumb to the antithetical habit of attempting to exhaust the enjoyment utterly in retrospect. Let us not underestimate the unanticipated sources of error that confront the disciple herein. He must of necessity navigate a multitude of temptations. each tending only to indurate his ego and incarcerate it within its own confines. It is incumbent upon him to open it expansively to the entire cosmos. It is requisite that he seek enjoyment, for only in this manner can the external world access him. Were he to blunt his capacity for enjoyment, he would become akin to a plant no longer capable of drawing nourishment from its environment. Yet, should he halt at the mere sensation of enjoyment, he remains sequestered within himself, existing as something only to himself, and as nothing to the world at large. Regardless of how deeply he may dwell within his own being, or how intensely he may cultivate his ego, the world shall exclude him. He is dead to the world. The disciple regards enjoyment solely as an instrument for ennobling himself on behalf of the world. Pleasure serves him as a scout, providing intelligence concerning the world, and having been instructed by pleasure, he subsequently proceeds to labor. He acquires knowledge not to amass wisdom as a private hoard, but rather to place his learning at the service of the world. In all forms of occultism, there exists a fundamental tenet that must not be transgressed if any objective whatsoever is to be attained. All instructors of the occult must impress upon their pupils the following. Every branch of knowledge sought solely to enrich one's own learning, merely to accumulate personal treasure, leads one astray from the path. Conversely, all knowledge sought for the purpose of laboring in the service of humanity and for the amelioration of the world propels one a step forward. This law must be rigorously observed, nor can one be considered a genuine disciple until he has adopted it as the guiding principle of his entire existence. In numerous occult schools, this verity is articulated in the following concise maxim. Every idea which does not become an ideal for you slays a power within your soul. Every idea which becomes an ideal creates within you a vital force. Chapter 3. Attaining Inner Calm. At the very inception of his curriculum, the novice is directed toward the path of reverence and the cultivation of the inner life. Occult pedagogy further provides practical instructions, through the observance of which he may learn to pursue that path and evolve that interior existence. These pragmatic directives possess no arbitrary foundation. They are predicated upon primordial experience and ancient wisdom. Wheresoever the avenues to higher erudition are delineated, they share an identical nature. All authentic preceptors of occultism concur regarding the essential character of these regulations, notwithstanding that they do not invariably articulate them in identical terminology. This divergence of expression is of a minor distinction, more apparent than actual, and is attributable to circumstances that need not be enumerated herein. No instructor desires, by the agency of such mandates, to establish an ascendancy over other individuals. He would not interfere with individual independence. Indeed, none respects and cherishes human individuality more profoundly than the masters of occultism. It was stated, in the initial portion of this volume, that the order comprising all initiates was encompassed by a wall, and that two laws constituted the principles by which it was sustained. Whenever the initiate departs this enclosure and ventures forth into the mundane world, he must submit to a third inviolable statute. It is as follows: maintain vigilance over each of your actions and each of your utterances, that you may not impede the free will of any human being. Those who perceive that genuine occult instructors are thoroughly permeated with this principle will comprehend that they may augment their independence through the practical directions they are counseled to observe. One of the primary regulations may be thus articulated in our vernacular: secure for yourself moments of internal tranquility, and within these intervals, learn to discriminate between the real and the unreal. I state advisedly expressed in our language, for originally all precepts and doctrines of occult science were conveyed in a symbolical sign language. Those who aspire to master its entire scope and significance must first secure permission to acquire this symbolical tongue, and before such authorization may be obtained, it is requisite to have undertaken the initial steps in occult knowledge. This may be accomplished through the meticulous observance of such rules as are herein presented. The path is accessible to all who earnestly resolve to enter it. Simple in truth and facile to follow is the precept concerning moments of interior calm, yet it leads to the objective only when the pursuit is as earnest and rigorous as the method is simple. It shall therefore be delineated here, without further preamble, the manner in which this rule ought to be observed. The student must demarcate a small fraction of his daily existence in which to occupy himself with matters quite distinct from the avocations of his ordinary life, and the manner in which he engages himself at such a time must also differ from the mode in which he executes the remainder of his duties. However, this does not imply that his actions during the time thus segregated possess no connection to his daily labors. On the contrary, the individual who seeks such moments in the proper fashion will soon ascertain that it is precisely this practice which grants him the full potency to execute his daily task. Nor must it be surmised that the observance of this rule genuinely deprives anyone of the time required for the discharge of his obligations. If any person genuinely possesses no greater time at his disposal, 5 minutes per diem shall suffice. The essential point is the manner in which these 5 minutes are utilized. During these periods, a man should elevate himself completely above his mundane existence. His thoughts and sentiments must assume a different coloration. His joys and sorrows, his cares, experiences, and actions must pass in review before his soul. Furthermore, he must cultivate a frame of mind that enables him to regard all his other experiences from a superior vantage point. We need only bear in mind how distinct is the perspective from which, in ordinary life, we regard the experiences and actions of another, compared to that from which we judge our own. This is inevitable, for we are interwoven with our own actions and experiences, whereas we merely contemplate those of another. Our objective in moments of seclusion must be to contemplate and adjudicate our own experiences and actions, as though it were not ourselves, but some other person to whom they applied. Postulate, for example, that a certain misfortune has befallen an individual. What a divergent attitude that person adopts toward it when compared with an identical calamity that has befallen his neighbor. None can censure this attitude as unjustifiable. It is an intrinsic component of human nature. And just as it obtains in exceptional circumstances, so it is also in the daily affairs of existence. The student must endeavor to attain the capacity to regard himself, at specific times, as he would regard a stranger. He must contemplate himself with the inward composure of the critic. When this is achieved, our own experiences present themselves in a novel light. So long as we are interwoven with them, and are, as it were, situated within them, we are as closely connected with the unreal as with the real. When we attain to a tranquil survey, the real is separated from the unreal. Sorrow and joy, every thought, every resolve, appear transformed when we contemplate ourselves in this manner. It is as though we had spent the entire day in a location where we perceived the minutest objects at the same range of vision as the most colossal ones, and in the evening ascended a neighboring hill to survey the entire scene simultaneously. Then the components of the landscape assume proportions different from those they bore when viewed from within. The value of such tranquil inward contemplation depends less upon the actual object we contemplate than upon the power which such inward calm develops within us. For in every human being there exists, beside what we term the mundane man, a higher entity. This higher entity remains concealed until it is awakened, and each of us can only awaken it for himself. Yet so long as this higher entity is not awakened, the superior faculties that might conduct one to supersensual knowledge must lie dormant or remain hidden in every man. This power which leads to inward calm is a magical force that liberates certain superior faculties. Until a seeker senses this magical force within him, he must continue to observe strictly and earnestly the rules provided. To every man who thus perseveres, the day shall arrive when a spiritual light is revealed to him, and an entire new world, whose existence was hitherto unsuspected, is discerned by an eye within him. Because he commences to follow this rule, there is no necessity for any external alteration in the life of the student. He discharges his duties as before, and initially he endures the same sorrows and experiences the same joys as of old. In no way does it estrange him from life. Rather, he is enabled to devote himself to it the more completely, because in the moments set apart, he possesses a higher life of his own. Gradually, this higher life will make its influence felt upon the ordinary existence. The tranquility of the moments set apart will influence his ordinary existence as well. The entire man will grow calmer, will attain serenity in all his actions, and will cease to be perturbed by all manner of incidents. Gradually, a student who thus advances will guide himself increasingly and be less governed by circumstances and external influences. Such a man will soon discover how profound a source of strength lies for him in these periods of contemplation. He will cease to be vexed by things that formerly worried him, and countless matters that once filled him with trepidation will now cease to alarm him. He acquires a novel perspective on life. Formerly, he may have undertaken this or that task with a sense of timidity. He would state, "I lack the power to execute this as well as I might desire." Now he no longer entertains such a thought, but instead formulates one quite different. He declares to himself, "I will summon all my strength in order to perform my labor as well as I possibly can." He suppresses the thought that encourages timidity, for he comprehends that this very diffidence might mar his undertaking, and that, in any event, it can contribute nothing toward the amelioration of his labor. Thus, one reflection succeeds another, each fraught with benefit for his entire existence, beginning to permeate the student's perspective. These displace the sentiments that previously exerted a hampering and debilitating influence. He commences to pilot his own vessel upon a firm and secure course amidst the waves of life, which formerly tossed it helplessly to and fro. This calm and serenity in turn react upon his entire being. They facilitate the growth of the inner man and of those interior faculties that conduce to higher knowledge. For it is through his progress in this direction that the student gradually attains a state wherein he himself determines the manner in which the impressions of the external world shall affect him. Thus, he may perceive a word spoken with the objective of wounding or vexing him. Prior to the commencement of his occult studies, such a remark would indeed have proved painful or irritating. However, now that he treads the path of discipleship, he is capable of removing its sting or its power to injure, even before it penetrates his consciousness. Consider another instance. We naturally grow impatient when detained, yet the student is so permeated, during his moments of tranquility, with the realization of the futility of impatience, that this composure remains with him on every occasion. The impatience that would naturally overwhelm him vanishes, and an interval that would otherwise have been squandered in the expression of annoyance may be utilized for making some profitable observation during the period of waiting. We must now comprehend the significance of these facts. We must recollect that the higher being within man is in a state of constant evolution, and only the condition of calm and serenity described herein renders an orderly development possible. The waves of exterior existence press in upon the inner man from all quarters. If, rather than controlling this outward life, he is controlled by it, such a man resembles a plant attempting to expand within a cleft in the rock, stunted in its growth until new space is afforded it. No external forces can supply space for the inner man. It can be provided only by the inner calm that he may grant to his soul. External circumstances can only alter the trajectory of his outer life. They can never awaken the spiritual inner man. The student must himself bring to birth the new and higher man within. The higher man becomes the inner ruler who directs the circumstances of the outer man with certain guidance. So long as the latter retains the ascendancy, this inner man remains enslaved and cannot therefore develop his powers. If one other than myself possesses the power to provoke me to anger, I am not master of myself, or, to articulate it more precisely, I have not yet discovered the ruler within me. I must develop the internal power to allow the impressions of the outer world to approach me only in the manner I myself choose. Then, and only then, do I truly become an occult student. And only by earnestly striving for this power may a student attain the goal. It is not of such great import to achieve a vast amount in a given time as it is to be earnest in the pursuit. Many have striven for years without perceiving any marked advancement, yet many of those who did not despair, but struggled on undaunted, have sometimes quite suddenly achieved the inner victory. In many situations, it requires considerable effort to achieve these moments of inward tranquility, but the greater the effort required, the more significant the achievement. In esoteric studies, everything depends upon the energy, inward verity, and uncompromising sincerity with which we contemplate ourselves and our actions from the standpoint of total strangers. However, only one facet of the student's inner activity is characterized by this birth of his own higher being. Something else, in addition, is requisite. Even if a man regards himself as a stranger, it is merely himself that he contemplates. He observes those experiences and actions with which he is connected through his particular mode of life, whereas it is necessary for him to ascend above this and attain a purely human point of view, no longer tethered to his own individual circumstances. He must proceed to the contemplation of those matters that concern him as a human being, even though he dwells in a different condition and under different circumstances. In this manner, something is brought to birth within him that transcends the personal point of view. Thus, his gaze is directed toward higher worlds than those he recognizes in everyday life. He then begins to sense and realize that he belongs to these higher realms, concerning which his senses and his daily occupations can relate nothing. In this way, He shifts the focal point of his being to the interior part of his nature. He hearkens to the voices within that speak to him in his moments of calm, and inwardly he cultivates an intercourse with the spiritual world, which removes him from the mundane world whose voices he no longer hears. Silence reigns around him. He banishes from himself all his external surroundings and everything that might even remind him of such external impressions. His entire soul is suffused with calm, inward contemplation and converse with a purely spiritual world. This calm contemplation must become a necessity for the student. He is plunged completely into a world of thought and must develop an earnest desire for tranquil cogitation. He must learn to cherish the influx of the Spirit. Then he shall learn to regard this thought world and its thought forms as more real than the everyday objects that surround him, and he begins to engage with thoughts as if they were things existing in space. The moment is then at hand, when the revelations of his quiet thinking begin to appear far higher and more real than the things existing in space. He discovers that this thought world is an expression of life, realizing that thoughts are not mere phantoms, but that through them, beings previously concealed now speak to him. He begins to distinguish voices through the silence. Formerly his ear was the sole organ of hearing. Now he can listen with his soul. An inner language and an inner voice are revealed unto him. It is a moment of supreme ecstasy for the student when this experience first befalls him. An inner light floods the entire external world for him, and he is born anew. Through his being passes a current from a divine world, bearing with it divine bliss. This thought life of the soul, which is gradually widened into a life of spiritual being, is designated by the Gnosis and by Theosophy as meditation. This meditation constitutes the means by which supersensual knowledge is attained. However, during such moments, the student must not remain content to surrender himself to the luxury of sensation. He must not permit undefined sentiments to take possession of his soul. That would serve only to hinder him from attaining true spiritual knowledge. His thoughts must be clearly and sharply defined, and he shall be aided in this by refusing to allow himself to be carried away blindly by the thoughts that arise within him. Rather, he must permeate his mind with the lofty ideas originating from advanced students to whom inspiration has already descended. Let him, first of all, study the wisdom that originated in such moments of meditation. The student shall discover such in the mystical, Gnostic, and theosophical literature of our time, and shall there acquire the material for his meditation. Wise men have inscribed within these volumes the thoughts of divine science, or have proclaimed them to the world through their agents. Such meditation produces a complete transformation within the student. He begins to form entirely new conceptions of reality. All things acquire fresh values in his eyes. It cannot be declared too frequently that this transformation does not estrange him from the world, nor does it detain him from his daily round of duties. For he begins to discern that his most trivial actions and experiences possess an intimate correlation with profound cosmic entities and events. Once this relationship is unveiled to him during his moments of contemplation, he is imbued with a revitalized and amplified capacity for his mundane obligations. For he then comprehends that his toil and his tribulations are contributed and sustained for the benefit of a vast, spiritual, cosmic totality. Consequently, rather than inducing exhaustion, his meditation affords him the fortitude to exist. With a steadfast gait, the student proceeds through life. Regardless of what fortune may bestow upon him, he advances unbowed. Previously he possessed no comprehension of why he labored and suffered, yet now he apprehends the purpose. It is manifest that such meditation is far more likely to conduce to the objective if pursued under the tutelage of experienced mentors, who possess precise knowledge regarding how all matters may be optimally executed. We ought therefore to solicit the counsel and direction of such seasoned guides. That which would otherwise remain mere tentative groping is transmuted by such guidance into endeavor that is assured of its destination. Those who petition teachers possessing such erudition and experience shall never appeal in vain. They must, however, be entirely certain that it is the counsel of a friend they desire, rather than the domination of an aspiring potentate. Those who possess genuine knowledge are invariably the most modest of men, and nothing is more foreign to their nature than that which is termed the passion for power. Those who, through the agency of meditation, ascend to that which unifies man with spirit, are vivifying within themselves the eternal element which is neither circumscribed by birth nor by death. Only those who lack personal experience can harbor skepticism regarding the existence of this eternal element. Thus, Meditation becomes the avenue by which man attains the recognition and contemplation of his eternal, indestructible, and essential being. And only through meditation may one achieve such a perspective on existence. Gnosis and Theosophy elucidate the eternal nature of this essential being and of its reincarnation. The query is frequently posed: why does man remain ignorant of those experiences which reside beyond the thresholds of birth and death? We ought not to inquire in this manner, but rather ask, how may we acquire such knowledge? The portal to the path is unlocked by correct meditation. This alone can reawaken the memory of events that reside beyond the boundaries of birth and death. Every individual is capable of attaining this knowledge. Within each of us lies the faculty for personally recognizing and contemplating the truths of mysticism, theosophy, and gnosis, provided that the appropriate means are selected. Only a being possessing ears and eyes may perceive tones and colors, nor can the eye discern without the light by which objects are rendered visible. Occult science imparts the means for cultivating the spiritual ears and eyes, and for kindling the spiritual light. According to esoteric teachers, there exist 3 stages by which the goal may be achieved. 1. Probation. This awakens the spiritual senses. 2. Enlightenment. This ignites the spiritual light. 3. Initiation. This establishes communion with higher spiritual beings. The following teachings emanate from a secret tradition, however. Precise information concerning its nature and its nomenclature cannot be divulged at present. They pertain to the 3 stages which, within the school of this tradition, lead to a specific degree of initiation. Yet here we shall encounter only as much of this tradition as may be openly articulated. These teachings are derived from a far more profound and esoteric doctrine. Within the occult schools themselves, a definitive course of instruction is adhered to. Furthermore, there exist specific practices which empower the human soul to attain conscious communion with the spiritual realm. These practices stand in approximately the same relation to that which will be conveyed in the subsequent pages as the curriculum of a rigorous academy bears to the instruction that might be gleaned casually during a promenade. Nevertheless, the fervent and persistent quest for that which is here alluded to will reveal the path by which one gains access to a genuine occult school. However, it is undeniable that an impatient perusal, devoid of sincerity and perseverance, can lead to naught. He who deems himself prepared for further advancement must petition an occult instructor. The study of these matters can prove efficacious only if the student heeds that which has already been inscribed in the preceding chapters. The stages which the aforementioned tradition delineates are the following 3: probation, enlightenment, and initiation. It is not strictly requisite that these 3 stages be undertaken such that one must have fully concluded the first before commencing the second, nor the second before embarking upon the third. With regard to specific aspects, one may partake of enlightenment, and indeed of initiation, while in other respects one remains within the probationary stage. Yet, it remains imperative to pass a certain duration in this stage of probation before any enlightenment whatsoever can commence. Furthermore, one must be enlightened to at least some degree before it becomes possible to enter upon the stage of initiation. In expounding upon them, however, it is necessary, for the sake of clarity, that the 3 stages be presented sequentially. Chapter 4. The stage of probation. Probation consists of the rigorous cultivation of the emotional and mental life. Through such refinement, the spiritual body becomes endowed with new instruments of perception and novel organs of activity, precisely as natural forces have fashioned the physical body, forming distinct organs from indeterminate living matter, organs well known to the physical senses. This process of cultivation commences by directing the soul's attention towards specific occurrences within the surrounding world. Such phenomena include, on the one hand, the germination, expansion, and flourishing of life in its myriad forms, and on the other, the fading, decay, and cessation of life within all things, insofar as they are perceptible to the ordinary senses. Whithersoever we direct our gaze, we may observe these processes occurring simultaneously, and everywhere they naturally elicit thoughts and feelings within mankind. However, under ordinary circumstances, an individual fails to apprehend the significance of these sensations. He hastens too rapidly from one impression to the next. It is therefore imperative that he should fix his attention intently and with complete consciousness upon these phenomena. Wherever he observes expansion and flourishing of a specific nature, he must expel all extraneous matter from his soul and surrender himself entirely, for a brief duration, to this solitary impression. He will soon ascertain that a sensation which heretofore, in a similar instance, would have merely flitted through his soul, is now so amplified that it acquires a powerful and energetic nature. He should immediately permit this thought form to resonate throughout his entire being, albeit quietly within himself. To accomplish this, he must achieve a state of profound inner stillness. He should detach himself from the external world and attend solely to that which his soul communicates. Yet let it not be assumed that significant progress can be achieved if we blunt our senses to the world, for one must first contemplate these objects as acutely and meticulously as possible, and subsequently surrender to the resulting sensations and the thoughts that arise within the soul. Of paramount importance is that one directs the attention with perfect interior equilibrium upon both of these phenomena. If one attains the requisite tranquility and surrenders himself to that which emerges within the soul, he will, in due course, experience many wondrous thoughts and feelings previously unknown to him. Indeed, the more frequently one fixes the attention in such a manner, alternating between that which is growing, expanding, and flourishing, and that which is fading and decaying, the more vivid these feelings will become. And just as natural forces evolve the physical eyes and ears of the physical body out of living matter, so too will the organs of clairvoyance evolve from the spiritual feelings thus elicited. A distinct thought form coalesces with the germinating and expanding object, and another, equally distinct, with that which is fading and decaying. However, this phenomenon will occur only if the cultivation of these feelings is pursued in the manner described. It is possible to describe the nature of these feelings only approximately. Indeed, every individual must arrive at his own conception of them as he traverses these inward experiences. He who has frequently fixed his attention upon the phenomena of germination, expansion, and flourishing will perceive something distantly akin to the sensation caused by witnessing a sunrise. Conversely, the phenomena of fading and decay will produce in him an experience comparable, in like manner, to the gradual ascent of the moon upon the horizon. Both of these feelings are forces which, when carefully cultivated with progressive refinement, will lead to the most profound occult results. To him who repeatedly, systematically, and with design surrenders himself to such feelings, a new world is unveiled. The spiritual world, the so-called astral plane, begins to dawn upon him. Blooming and fading are facts which no longer create indefinite impressions upon him, as in former times. Instead, they configure themselves into spiritual lines and figures of which he had previously surmised nothing. These lines and figures assume distinct forms for different phenomena. A blooming flower, a growing animal, or a decaying tree evokes definite lines within his soul. The astral plane slowly expands before him. Its forms are by no means arbitrary. For two students who are situated at the same stage of development will invariably perceive the same lines and figures under identical conditions, with the same certainty that a round table is perceived as round by two individuals of normal faculty, rather than as round by one and square by the other. So too will a blooming flower present the identical spiritual form to the perception of two souls. And just as the morphology of animals and plants is described in ordinary natural history, so too does the teacher in an occult school describe and delineate the spiritual forms of growing and decaying processes according to their nature and species. If the student has advanced to such a degree that he can perceive those aspects of phenomena which are also physically observable with his external eyes, he is then proximate to the condition that will enable him to behold realities possessing no physical existence, realities which must therefore remain entirely concealed to those who have undergone no training in an occult school. It must be emphasized that the occult explorer ought never to lose himself in speculation regarding the meaning of this or that phenomenon. By such intellectualizing, he merely diverts himself from the true path. He ought to look out upon the sense world freshly, with healthy senses and quickened observation, and subsequently surrender himself to his own sensations. He ought not to seek, in a speculative manner, to decipher the significance of this or that, but rather to allow the things themselves to instruct him. A further consideration of importance is that which is termed in occult science orientation in the higher worlds. This stage is attained when one comprehends with complete consciousness that feelings and thoughts are veritable realities, just as tangible as tables and chairs in the world of the physical senses. Feelings and thoughts interact within the astral world and the mental world, precisely as objects of sense interact within the physical world. As long as one is not truly permeated with this realization, He will not believe that an evil thought projected from his mind may possess as devastating an effect upon other thought forms as that inflicted upon physical objects by a bullet discharged at random. Such an individual will perhaps never permit himself to execute a physically visible action which he deems immoral, yet he will not recoil from harboring evil thoughts or feelings, for these do not appear to him to be perilous to the remainder of the world. Nevertheless, we can progress in occult science only when we guard our thoughts and feelings in the exact manner that a man would guard his steps within the physical world. If one perceives a wall before him, he does not attempt to dash violently through it, but rather directs his course alongside it. In other words, he guides himself by the laws of the physical world. There exist such laws also in the world of thought and feeling, but there they cannot impose themselves upon us from without. They must emanate from the life of the soul itself. We arrive at such a condition when we prohibit ourselves at all times from fostering malevolent thoughts or feelings. All arbitrary vacillations, all idle fancies, and all accidental fluctuations of emotion must be forbidden in the same manner. Yet, in so doing, let it not be assumed that we induce a deficiency of emotion. On the contrary, if we regulate our inner life in this manner, we shall speedily discover ourselves to be rich in feelings and in genuine creative imagination. Superseding a mere chaos of petty feelings and fanciful trains of thought, significant emotions and fruitful thoughts emerge, and it is emotions and thoughts of this nature that guide a man toward orientation in the higher world. He has entered into the requisite condition for the entities of that sphere, and they entail for him definite consequences. Just as a physical man finds his way among physical objects, so too does his path now lead him unerringly between the growing and the fading, phenomena he has already come to know in the manner described above. For he follows all processes of growth and flourishing, a pursuit necessary for his own prosperity and that of the world. The student of the occult must also bestow further care upon the world of sound. He must discriminate between the tones produced by so-called inert bodies and those proceeding from a living creature. He who perceives the striking of a bell will receive the sound and attach to it a certain sensation, but he who hears the cry of an animal will, in addition to this sensation, become aware that the sound also reveals an inward experience of the animal, whether of pain or of pleasure. The student is concerned with this latter aspect of the sound. He must concentrate his undivided attention upon it, so that the sound reveals to him something lying outside his own soul, and moreover he must merge himself with this exterior entity. He must closely connect his own emotion with the pleasure or pain communicated to him by means of the sound, and must remain indifferent as to whether the tone is agreeable or unpleasant to him, welcome or otherwise. His soul must be filled solely with that which proceeds from the creature from whom the sound has issued. He who systematically and deliberately performs such exercises will develop within himself the faculty of intermingling, as it were, with the creature from which the sound proceeded. A person sensitive to music will find it less arduous to cultivate his spiritual life in this respect than one who is unmusical, yet no one should presume that a mere sense of music will substitute for this culture. As a student of the occult, one must learn to contemplate the entirety of nature in this manner. By so doing, a new faculty is developed in the world of thought and feeling. Through her manifold sounds, the whole of nature begins to whisper secrets to the student. That which hitherto was merely incomprehensible noise to his soul will, by this means, become a coherent language of nature. And whereas hitherto he perceived sound only from the resonance of so-called inanimate objects, he now comprehends a new speech of the soul. Should he advance in this culture of the soul, he will soon ascertain that he can hear what hitherto he did not even surmise. He begins to hear with the soul. One further matter must be added before we can attain the zenith in this direction. Of special importance in the development of the student is the manner in which he hears the speech of other men. He must accustom himself to do this in such a way that, while doing so, his inner self remains absolutely quiescent. If one person expresses an opinion and another hears it, the inner self of the latter will typically be stirring in general assent or contradiction. Many people in such a case feel themselves urged to an expression of their assent, or more especially, of their contradiction. All such assent or contradiction must, in the occult student, be silenced. It is not imperative that he should, therefore, quite suddenly begin to render his life entirely different in order that he may attain this inward and fundamental calm. He might, therefore, commence by doing so in special cases, deliberately selected by himself. Thus, quite slowly and by degrees, will this new mode of listening creep into his habits, as if of its own accord. In the occult schools, these disciplines are systematically practiced. For the sake of practice, the student is obliged to listen for a certain period to the most contradictory thoughts, and at the same time to suppress all assent, and more especially all adverse criticism. The objective is that, in such a way, not only all intellectual judgment is silenced, but also all sense of displeasure, denial, or even acceptance. The student must be particularly watchful that such feelings, even if they are not upon the surface, do not still remain lurking in the innermost recesses of his soul. He must listen, for example, to the statements of people who in some respects are far beneath him, and, while so doing, suppress every feeling of greater knowledge or of superiority. It is useful for everyone to listen in this way to children, for even the wisest may learn much from children. Thus does it come about that we hear the words of others impersonally, completely divested of our own personality with its opinions and feelings. He who thus makes a practice of listening uncritically, even when a completely contradictory opinion is advanced, learns again and again to blend himself, to become identified with the being of another. He then hears, as it were, through the words and into the souls of others. Only through continual exercise of this kind does sound become the right medium for the revelation of the spirit and the soul. Naturally, it implies the strictest self-discipline, but it leads to a lofty goal. When these practices are undertaken in connection with those dealing with the sounds of nature, the soul develops a new sense of hearing. It is enabled to receive demonstrations from the spiritual world which do not find their expression in outward sounds apprehensible by the physical ear. The perception of the inner word awakens. Gradually, truths from the spiritual world reveal themselves to the student, and he hears them expressed in a spiritual manner. All high truths are attained through such inner encouragement, and what we hear from the lips of a genuine occult teacher has been experienced in this manner. In stating this, it must not be supposed that it is useless to acquaint oneself with the writings on occult science before one can actually gain this inner encouragement. On the contrary, the reading of such writings and the listening to eminent teachers of occult lore are themselves the means of attaining personal knowledge. Every sentence of the esoteric wisdom which one hears is adapted to direct the senses to that point which must be attained before the soul can experience a real advance. To the practice of all that has been indicated must be added an ardent study of what the occult teacher disseminates to the world. In all occult schools, such a study belongs to the probationary period, and he who would employ other methods will attain no goal if he omits the instructions of the occult teacher. For inasmuch as these instructions proceed from an actual inner word, an actual encouragement, they possess in themselves a spiritual vitality. They are not mere words. They are living powers, and while you follow the words of an occultist, while you read a book which comes from a genuine inner experience, powers are at work in your soul which render you clairvoyant, just as natural forces have created your eyes and ears out of living matter. Chapter 5. Gaining spiritual illumination. Enlightenment proceeds from remarkably fundamental operations. Here, as elsewhere, the objective is the cultivation of specific sentiments and cogitations which lie latent within all mankind, yet require awakening. Solely the individual who executes these elementary procedures with absolute patience, unceasingly and rigorously, may be guided by them toward the attainment of inner illumination. The initial measure is undertaken by scrutinizing distinct natural entities in a specific manner: a crystalline stone of exquisite formation, a plant, and an animal. One must strive initially to focus one's entire attention upon a comparison between the mineral and the beast, proceeding as follows. The thoughts elicited thereby, accompanied by potent emotions, must permeate the soul, and no extraneous sentiments or reflections may be intermingled with them, nor disrupt this profound contemplation. One then articulates the following internally. The stone possesses a form, and the animal likewise possesses a form. The stone remains static in its location, whereas the animal retains the capacity for locomotion. It is impulse that impels the animal to alter its position, and it is these impulses that the form of the animal serves. Its organs and instruments constitute the expression of these drives. The form of the stone, conversely, is fashioned not in accordance with desires, but rather in accordance with a force devoid of impulse, if one immerses oneself deeply in such reflections, and while doing so observes the stone and the animal with unwavering focus. There emerge within the soul two distinct categories of emotion. From the stone, One specific type of sentiment streams into the soul, and from the animal, another. In all likelihood, the experiment will not succeed at the outset, yet gradually, through genuine and patient application, these emotions become manifest. One must practice repeatedly. Initially, the emotions persist solely for the duration of the contemplation. Subsequently, they continue to operate thereafter, eventually evolving into an entity that endures within the soul. One need then only reflect, and both emotions invariably arise, independent of any contemplation of an external object. From these sentiments, and the thoughts inextricably bound to them, organs of clairvoyance are generated. Should the plant be incorporated into this contemplation, one will observe that the feeling emanating from it, in both quality and degree, is situated intermediate to that which flows from the stone and that from the animal. The organs thus formed constitute spiritual eyes. We learn incrementally, and through their agency, to perceive both astral and mental colors. As long as one has achieved merely the condition designated as probation, the spiritual world, with its lines and figures, remains obscured, yet through enlightenment it shall become lucid. It must be noted herein that the terms dark and light, as well as other vernacular expressions, describe the actual meaning only approximately, for language as conventionally comprehended is constructed to accommodate physical conditions exclusively. Occult science delineates that which emanates from the stone, and is perceived by clairvoyant eyes as blue or bluish-red, while that observed originating from the animal is characterized as red or reddish-yellow. In reality, it is colors of a spiritual nature that are discerned. The hue proceeding from the plant is green. Plants are precisely those natural phenomena whose qualities in the higher realms bear similarity to their qualities in the physical world. However, this is not the case regarding stones and animals. It must now be comprehended with clarity that the aforementioned colors merely indicate the prevailing shades of the stone, the plant, or the animal. In actuality, all conceivable overtones exist, for every animal, every stone, and every plant possesses its own distinctive hue. In addition to these, there exist the creatures of the higher worlds, who invariably manifest in colors not their own, often magnificent, often grotesque. In summary, the diversity of colors within these higher realms is immeasurably superior to that of the physical world. Once an individual has acquired the faculty of perception through spiritual eyes, he eventually encounters the beings mentioned herein, some superior, some inferior to man himself, entities that have never entered into physical existence. When he has progressed to this extent, the path to a vast expanse lies open before him. However, it is imprudent to proceed further without an experienced guide. Indeed, regarding all that has been described herein, such experienced guidance is desirable, and he who possesses the endurance to satisfy the elementary conditions of enlightenment will assuredly seek out and locate his mentor. Under all circumstances, it is imperative to issue a warning, and he who refuses to heed it would be best advised to leave untraversed every step of occult science. It is requisite that he who aspires to become an occult student should forfeit none of his attributes as a virtuous and noble man, nor as one receptive to all physical truths. Indeed, throughout his apprenticeship, he must continually augment his moral fortitude, his inner purity, and his powers of observation. Let us cite an example. During the preliminary practices of enlightenment, the student must remain consistently vigilant to expand his sympathy regarding the animal and human worlds, as well as his appreciation of nature's beauty. If he fails to exercise this care, he continually blunts both sensation and feeling, his heart grows cold, and his sympathies diminish, leading to hazardous consequences. The manner in which enlightenment advances, in the sense of the preceding exercises, ascending from the stone, the plant, and the animal up to man, and how, subsequent to enlightenment, the gentle hand of the pilot invariably arrives on a certain day to lead the aspirant to initiation, these matters shall be addressed in the subsequent chapter, insofar as it is possible and permissible to do so. In the present era, the path to occult science is pursued by many. It is sought in diverse manners, and numerous dangerous, even reprehensible, methods are practiced. It is for this reason that those who possess knowledge of the truth and the dangers concerning these matters have authorized a greater portion of occult training and the requisite warnings to be published. Only as much is disclosed herein as this permission grants, and it is necessary that a portion of the truth be known so that it may counteract the grave danger of these errors. If nothing is compelled, there exists no peril for him who adheres to the path already described. Yet one caveat must be observed. No one ought to expend more time or energy upon such practices than is available to him with due regard for his circumstances and obligations. No one ought to abruptly alter any aspect of the external conditions of his life. If one desires authentic outcomes, one must possess patience. One should be capable of ceasing the practice after a few minutes, and subsequently resuming one's daily labors tranquilly, ensuring that no thought of these exercises is intertwined with the work of the day. He who has not mastered the art of waiting, in the paramount and most elevated sense of the word, is of no utility as an occult student, nor will he ever attain results of substantial worth. He who pursues occult knowledge through the methods delineated in the foregoing pages must fortify himself throughout the entire course of his efforts with the understanding that, after persisting for some time, he may have achieved significant advancement without becoming conscious of it in the precise manner he had anticipated. He who fails to recall this is liable to succumb to discouragement, and shortly thereafter to relinquish his efforts altogether. The mental powers and faculties poised for development are initially of the most subtle order, and their nature diverges fundamentally from the notions of them which may be formed in the student's mind. He has been accustomed to concerning himself solely with the physical world, and thus the mental and astral realms seem to evade his vision and confound his conceptions. It is, therefore, not extraordinary if, at first, he fails to recognize the new forces, mental and astral, which are unfolding within his own being. This is precisely why it is perilous to embark upon the path leading to occult knowledge without experienced guidance. The preceptor discerns the progress achieved by the pupil long before the latter becomes personally cognizant of it. He observes the subtle organs of spiritual vision commencing their formation prior to the pupil's awareness of their existence. Indeed, a substantial portion of the mentor's obligations comprises perpetual vigilance, lest the disciple forfeit confidence, patience, and perseverance before becoming sentient of his own advancement. The teacher, as is established, can bestow upon the student no capacities that are not already latent within him. His exclusive function is to aid in the arousal of dormant faculties. Yet he may serve as a pillar of fortitude to the one who endeavors to penetrate through obscurity into the light. There are many who abandon the occult path shortly after embarking upon it, for the reason that they are not immediately cognizant of their own progression. Furthermore, even when superior experiences begin to dawn upon the seeker, he is prone to dismiss them as illusions, inasmuch as he had anticipated them in a markedly different manner. He forfeits his courage, either because he deems these initial experiences devoid of value, or because they appear so trivial that he entertains no hope of their culminating in any appreciable results within a measurable duration. Courage and self-confidence constitute the two lamps which must never be permitted to extinguish themselves upon the pathway to the occult. He who cannot patiently reiterate an exercise which has failed for an apparently illimitable number of times shall never journey far. Long before one is aware of any distinct perception of advancement, there arrives an inarticulate mental impression that the correct route has been discovered. This is a sensation to be welcomed and encouraged, since it may evolve into a trustworthy guide. Above all, it is imperative to extirpate the notion that any fantastic, mysterious practices are requisite for the attainment of higher experiences. It must be clearly realized that ordinary, quotidian human sentiments and thoughts must constitute the foundation from which the commencement is to be made, and that it is only necessary to grant these thoughts and feelings a new orientation. Everyone must articulate to himself, "Within my own sphere of thoughts and sensations lie enfolded the profoundest mysteries. Yet hitherto I have been unable to perceive them." Ultimately, it all resolves itself into the fact that man ordinarily bears body, soul, and spirit about with him, yet is conscious only of the body, not of the soul and spirit, and that the student, in due time, attains to a commensurate consciousness of soul and spirit. Hence, it is of paramount importance to impart the proper direction to thoughts and feelings, in order that one may develop the perception of that which remains invisible to a person leading the ordinary existence. One of the methods by which this development may be executed will now be indicated. Again, like nearly everything else we have elucidated thus far, it is a matter of considerable simplicity. Yet the results are of the greatest consequence, provided the experiment is conducted with perseverance and in the appropriate frame of mind. Position before yourself the small seed of a plant. It is subsequently necessary, while contemplating this significant object, to generate with intensity the correct species of thoughts and through these thoughts to cultivate certain feelings. In the first place, let the student clearly apprehend what is truly presented to his vision. Let him delineate to himself the form, color, and all other attributes of the grain of seed. Then let his mind dwell upon the following train of thought. This grain of seed, if planted in the soil, will develop into a plant of complex structure. Let him clearly visualize this plant to himself. Let him construct it within his imagination. And then let him reflect that the object now existing solely in his imagination will presently be brought into actual physical existence by the forces of the earth and of light. If the object contemplated by him were an artificially fabricated item, though such a precise imitation of nature that no external difference could be detected by human eyesight, no forces inherent in the earth or light could avail to produce from it a plant. He who thoroughly grasps this concept and inwardly assimilates it will also be capable of forming the following idea with the correct sentiment. He will reason thus: that which is ultimately destined to grow out of this seed is already, as a force, now secretly enfolded within it. The artificial duplicate of the seed contains no such force, and yet both appear identical to my eyes. The genuine seed, therefore, contains something invisible which is not present in the imitation. It is upon this invisible element that thought and feeling are now to be concentrated. Let the student fully realize that this invisible element will subsequently translate itself into a visible plant, perceptible by him in shape and color. Let him dwell upon the thought: the invisible shall become visible. If I could not think, then I could not now realize that which will become visible subsequently. Particular stress must be laid upon the importance of feeling with intensity that which one thinks. In calmness of mind, a single thought must be vitally experienced within oneself to the exclusion of all disturbing influences. Sufficient time must be allocated to allow the thought, and the state of feeling connected therewith, to become, as it were, embedded in the soul. If that is accomplished in the correct manner, possibly not until after numerous attempts, an inward force will make itself felt. And this force will engender new powers of perception. The grain of seed will appear as if enclosed in a small luminous cloud. The spiritualized vision of the student perceives it as a species of flame. This flame is of a lilac hue in the center, blue at the peripheries. Then appears that which one could not see before, and which was created by the power of thought and feeling brought into life within oneself. That which was physically invisible has there revealed itself to the spiritual eye. It is pardonable if, to many men, all this appears to be mere illusion. Many will inquire, what is the value of such visions or such hallucinations? And many will thus fall away, and no longer continue to tread the path. But this is precisely the salient point, not to confuse, at this arduous stage of human evolution, spiritual reality with the mere creations of fantasy, and to possess the courage to press resolutely onward, rather than growing timorous and faint-hearted. On the other hand, however, it is necessary to insist on the necessity of maintaining unimpaired, and of perpetually cultivating, the healthy attitude of mind which is required for distinguishing truth from illusion. Never, during all these exercises, must the student surrender fully conscious control of himself. He must continue to think as soundly and sanely in these spiritual conditions as he does with regard to the things and occurrences of ordinary life. It would be unfortunate were he to lapse into reveries. He must at every moment be clear-headed and sober-minded, and it would be the greatest error if the student, through such practices, lost his mental equilibrium, or if he were prevented from judging as sanely and clearly as before the matters of quotidian life. The disciple should, therefore, examine himself repeatedly to ascertain whether he has remained unaltered in relation to the circumstances among which he resides, or whether perchance he has lost his mental balance. He must ever maintain a calm repose within his own individuality and an open mind for everything, being careful at the same time not to drift into vague reveries or to experiment with all manner of exercises. The lines for development here indicated belong to those which have been followed, and whose efficacy has been demonstrated in the schools of occultism from the earliest ages, and none but such shall here be presented. Any individual attempting to employ methods of meditation formulated by his own agency, or which he may have encountered during the course of indiscriminate reading, will inevitably be misguided, and will forfeit his direction within an illimitable quagmire of incoherent phantasms. A subsequent exercise, which may follow the one previously delineated, is as follows. Let the disciple position himself before a plant that has attained the stage of complete maturation. Now let his intellect be absorbed by the contemplation that the moment is imminent when this plant will wither and perish. Nothing, he ought to affirm within himself, nothing of that which I currently behold before me will endure. Yet this plant will have evolved seeds which in their succession will develop into new vegetation. Once more I become cognizant that within what I behold, something lies concealed which is imperceptible to my sight. I shall saturate my consciousness entirely with the thought that this plant form with its hues will cease to exist. However, the realization that the plant has produced seeds instructs me that it will not vanish into absolute nothingness, that which preserves it from this disappearance. I can at this juncture no more perceive with my physical eyes than I could originally discern the plant within the grain of seed. The plant, therefore, harbors something which my eyes are unable to behold. If this concept resides fully within me and merges with the corresponding emotional state, then, in due course, a force will again develop within my soul which will mature into a new mode of perception. Out of the plant, there emerges once more a flame-like manifestation which is naturally proportionately larger than that which was antecedently described. This flame is verdant at the center and is suffused with yellow at the outer periphery. He who has attained this vision has acquired a significant advantage, inasmuch as he beholds entities not only in their present state of being, but also in their genesis and dissolution. He commences to perceive in all things the spirit, of which the physical organs of sight possess no perception, and he has undertaken the initial steps upon that path, which will progressively guide him toward the resolution, through direct vision, of the mystery of birth and death. To the external senses, a being commences existence at its birth, and ceases to exist at its death. This, however, appears to be so merely because these senses are incapable of apprehending the concealed spirit. Birth and death are, for this spirit, merely transformations. Just as the unfurling of the flower from the bud is a transformation enacted before our physical eyes. Yet, if one aspires to attain direct perception of these verities, one must first awaken the spiritual vision by the means herein indicated, in order to address an objection which may be raised by certain individuals already possessed of some psychical experience. Let it be immediately conceded that there exist more abbreviated paths than this, and that there are persons who possess direct perception of the actualities of birth and death, without having been compelled to undergo all the stages of discipline herein set forth. There are also human beings endowed with elevated psychical faculties, for whom only a slight impetus is requisite for the development of these powers. However, they are exceptional, and the methods described above are safer, and are capable of general application. Similarly, it is possible to acquire some knowledge of chemistry by special methods, but in order to ensure the reliability of the science of chemistry, the recognized, dependable course must be followed. An error fraught with grave consequences would ensue from the assumption that the objective could be attained more simply by allowing the mind to dwell merely upon an imaginary plant or a grain of seed. It may be possible by such means to evoke a force which would enable the soul to attain the inner vision. Yet this vision will be, in the majority of instances, a mere figment of the imagination, for the primary objective is not to create a mental vision arbitrarily, but to allow the veritable nature of things to form an image within one's mind. The truth must emerge from the profundity of one's own soul, not at the behest of one's ordinary self. Rather, the objects of one's perception must themselves exercise their magical power, if one is to perceive their inner reality. After the disciple has evolved, by such means, the rudiments of spiritual vision, he may proceed to the contemplation of human nature itself. Simple manifestations of ordinary life must be selected initially. However, before undertaking any attempts in this direction, it is imperative for the student to strive for an absolute sincerity of moral character. He must banish all thoughts of ever utilizing the insight to be attained in these ways for his own selfish ends. He must be absolutely determined that under no circumstances will he avail himself, in a malevolent sense, of any power which he may acquire over his fellow creatures. This is the reason why everyone who desires to gain direct insight into the secrets of human nature must adhere to the golden rule of true occultism. And the golden rule is this: for every single step that you take in the pursuit of the hidden knowledge, take 3 steps in the perfecting of your own character. He who obeys this rule can perform such exercises as that which is now to be elucidated. Commence by observing a person possessed by a desire for some object. Direct your attention to this desire. It is optimal to select a moment when this desire is at its zenith, and when it is not yet certain whether the object of the desire will be attained or not. Then surrender yourself entirely to the contemplation of that which you observe, but maintain the utmost inner tranquility of soul. Make every endeavor to be deaf and blind to everything that may be transpiring around you simultaneously, and bear in mind particularly that this contemplation is intended to evoke a state of feeling within your soul. Allow this state of feeling to arise within your soul, like a cloud ascending upon an otherwise cloudless horizon. It is to be expected, naturally, that your observation will be interrupted, because the person upon whom it is directed will not remain in this particular state of mind for a sufficient duration of time. Presumably, you will fail in your experiment hundreds upon hundreds of times. It is simply a matter of not forfeiting patience. After numerous attempts, you will ultimately realize the state of feeling aforementioned as rapidly as the corresponding mental phenomena pass through the soul of the person under observation. Subsequently, you will begin to discern that this feeling within your own soul is evoking the power of spiritual vision into the psychical condition of the other. A luminous image will manifest in your field of vision, and this luminous image is the so-called astral manifestation evoked by the desire state when under observation. Again, we may describe this image as flame-like in appearance. It is yellowish-red at the center and reddish-blue or lilac at the peripheries. Much depends upon treating such experiences of the inner vision with the utmost delicacy. It will be optimal for you initially to speak of them to no one, save for your teacher, should you possess one. The endeavor to describe such appearances in appropriate words usually leads to egregious self-deception. One employs ordinary terminology inapplicable to such purposes, and therefore far too coarse and clumsy. The consequence is that one's own attempt to clothe this vision in words unconsciously leads one to blend the actual experience with an alloy of imaginary details. It is therefore another important law for the occult inquirer that he should know how to observe silence concerning his inner visions. Observe silence even toward yourself. Do not endeavor to express in words that which you perceive, nor to fathom it with reasoning faculties that are inadequate. Freely surrender yourself to these spiritual impressions without any mental reservations, and without disturbing them by thinking about them excessively. For you must remember that your reasoning faculties were, initially, by no means commensurate with your faculties of observation. You have acquired these reasoning faculties through experiences hitherto confined exclusively to the world as apprehended by your physical senses. Conversely, the faculties you are currently obtaining transcend the boundaries of such experiences. Consequently, one must not attempt to gauge these novel and elevated perceptions against the antiquated standard. Only the individual who has already secured a measure of certitude regarding the observation of inner experiences should discourse upon them, with the intention of thereby stimulating his fellow beings. By way of a supplementary exercise, the following practice may be expounded. Direct your observation, in the precise manner previously established, upon a fellow being to whom the fulfillment of a wish or the gratification of a desire has recently been accorded. Should the identical regulations and precautions be adopted as in the preceding instance, you shall once again attain to spiritual perception. You shall discern a flame-like manifestation, characterized by a yellow center and greenish margins. Through such scrutiny of one's fellow creatures, one may easily be seduced into a moral failing, one may become uncharitable. Every conceivable measure must be employed to combat this inclination. Whosoever exercises such powers of observation ought to have ascended to that plateau whereon one is absolutely convinced that thoughts are substantive entities. He may then no longer permit himself to entertain thoughts incompatible with the highest reverence for the dignity of human life and of human liberty. Not for a single instant must he harbor the notion of regarding a human being as a mere object for observation. It must be the objective of self-education to ensure that the faculties for a psychic observation of human nature proceed hand in hand with a full recognition of the prerogatives of each individual. That essence which dwells within each human being must be regarded as sacred, to be held inviolate by us even within our thoughts and sentiments. We must be possessed by a sensation of reverential awe regarding all that is human. For the present, only these two examples may be provided concerning the methods by which an insight into human nature may be achieved, yet they shall at least serve to indicate the path which must be pursued. He who has acquired the inner tranquility and repose indispensable for such observations will, by that very act, have already undergone a profound transformation. This shall soon reach the juncture at which the augmentation of his spiritual worth manifests itself in the confidence and composure of his outward demeanor. Furthermore, this alteration in his demeanor will react favorably upon his inner condition, and thus he shall be enabled to assist himself further along the thoroughfare. He will discover methods of penetrating ever deeper into those secrets of human nature, those concealed from our external senses, and will subsequently become qualified for a profounder insight into the mysterious correlations between the nature of man and all else that exists in the universe. By pursuing this trajectory, the disciple will approach ever closer to the day on which he shall be deemed worthy of undertaking the initial steps of initiation, however. Before these may be taken, it is requisite to assure oneself of unflinching courage. Initially, it may not be at all apparent to the student why this should be necessary, yet he cannot fail to be convinced of it ultimately. The quality which is indispensable to him who would be initiated is a certain measure of courage and fearlessness. He must absolutely go out of his way to locate opportunities for cultivating these virtues. In the occult schools, they are cultivated quite systematically. However, life in this respect is itself an excellent school of occultism, nay, possibly the premier one. To face danger with equanimity, to attempt to surmount difficulties unswervingly, this is what the student must learn to execute. For instance, in the presence of some peril, he must rise at once to the conception that fears are altogether futile and ought not to be entertained for a single moment, but rather that the mind ought simply to be concentrated on what is to be performed. He must reach a juncture where it has become impossible for him ever again to experience fear or to forfeit his courage. Through self-discipline in this direction, he will develop within himself distinct qualities which he requires if he is to be initiated into the higher mysteries. Just as man in his physical being requires nervous force to utilize his physical senses, so also in his psychic nature, he requires the force which is generated solely in the courageous and the fearless. For in penetrating to the higher mysteries, he shall behold phenomena not yet revealed to the physical eyesight, nor to any other of the human senses. The latter, by concealing the higher verities from our gaze, are in reality our benefactors, since they prevent us from perceiving that which, if realized without due preparation, would cast us into unutterable consternation. The disciple must be prepared to endure this vision, notwithstanding that he has lost certain supports in the outer world through a realization of the very illusions that encompassed him. It is truly and literally as though his attention were suddenly drawn to a certain danger by which, for some time, he had been unconsciously threatened. He was not afraid hitherto, but now that he perceives his peril, he is overcome by terror, even though the danger has not been rendered any greater by his knowledge thereof. The forces at work in the world are both destructive and creative. The destiny of manifested beings is birth and death. The initiate is to behold this march of destiny. The veil, which in the ordinary course of life clouds the spiritual eyes, is to be uplifted, and the man is to see himself as one interwoven with these forces, with this destiny. His own nature contains destructive and creative powers. As undisguisedly as the other objects of his vision are revealed to the eye of the seer, his own soul is bared to his gaze. In the face of this self-knowledge, the disciple must not suffer himself to falter, and in this, he will succeed only if he has brought with him an excess of the necessary fortitude. In order that this may be the case, he must learn to maintain inner calm and confidence in the most arduous circumstances. He must nourish within himself a firm faith in the beneficent forces of existence. He must be prepared to discover that many motives which have actuated him hitherto will actuate him no longer. He must needs perceive that he has hitherto often thought or acted in a certain manner because he was still in the toils of ignorance. Reasons which formerly influenced him will now vanish. He has done many things out of personal vanity. He will now perceive how utterly futile all such vanity is in the eyes of the initiate. He has done much from motives of avarice. He will now be aware of the destructive effect of all avariciousness. He will have to develop entirely new springs for his thought and action, and it is for this that courage and fearlessness are required. It is especially a matter of cultivating this courage and this fearlessness in the inmost depths of the mental life. The disciple must learn never to despair. He must always be equal to the thought, "I will forget that I have again failed in this matter. I will try once more, as though nothing at all had happened." Thus, he will fight his way on to the firm conviction that the universe contains inexhaustible fountains of strength from which he may drink. He must aspire again and again to the divine, which will uplift and support him, however feeble and impotent the mortal part of his being may prove. He must be capable of pressing on towards the future, undismayed by any experiences of the past. Every teacher of occultism will carefully ascertain how far the disciple, aspiring to initiation into the higher mysteries, has advanced on the road of spiritual preparation. If he fulfills these conditions to a certain degree, he is then worthy to hear uttered those names of things which form the key that unlocks the higher knowledge. For initiation is comprised of this precise undertaking, to comprehend the entities of the universe by those names which they bear within the spirit of their divine author. Furthermore, the profound mystery of all things resides within these names. It is for this reason that the initiate articulates a language distinct from that of the uninitiated, for he is cognizant of the names by which all things were called into existence. Chapter 6. The Initiation Process. The supreme degree in occultism, regarding which it is permissible to speak in a volume intended for the general public, is initiation. It is impossible to divulge information concerning all that resides beyond this point, although the path to it may invariably be discovered by one who has previously advanced and penetrated the lesser secrets and mysteries. The knowledge and power best owed upon an individual through initiation could not be acquired in any alternative manner, save in some remote future epoch, after numerous incarnations, upon a divergent path and in a wholly distinct form. He who is initiated at present experiences that which he would otherwise be destined to undergo at a much later period and under vastly different circumstances. It is appropriate that a person should ascertain only so much of the secrets of nature as is commensurate with his own degree of development. For this reason alone do impediments bar his way to complete knowledge and power. Individuals should not be entrusted with the utilization of firearms until they have acquired sufficient experience to ensure, with absolute certainty, that they will not employ them maliciously or negligently. If a person were to be initiated at present without the requisite preparation, he would remain devoid of those experiences which, in the normal course of his evolution, would accrue to him in the future during subsequent incarnations, bringing with them the corresponding secrets. At the portal of initiation, these experiences must therefore be supplied by alternative means, and in their stead, the candidate is obliged to undergo preliminary instruction. These are the so-called trials which must be surmounted. These trials are currently being discussed in various books and periodicals, but owing to the inherent nature of such discussion, it is not surprising that erroneous impressions are conceived concerning them. For those who have not already traversed the periods of probation and enlightenment know nothing of these trials, and consequently they cannot adequately depict them. Certain matters or subjects connected with the higher worlds are presented to the candidate, yet he is capable of seeing and hearing these only when he can clearly discern the figures, tones, and colors for which he has been prepared by the teachings of probation and enlightenment. The first trial consists in obtaining a clearer comprehension of the corporeal attributes of what appear to be inanimate objects, and subsequently of plants, of animals, and of human beings. This is not synonymous with what is commonly termed scientific knowledge. With that, it possesses no connection, but rather it pertains to intuition. That which customarily occurs is that the initiate discloses to the candidate how the objects of nature and the essence of living entities reveal themselves to spiritual and mental audition and vision. In a certain manner, these things then lie exposed, distinct and unadorned, before the observer. Attributes and qualities which are obscured from physical eyes and ears can then be seen and heard. Heretofore they have been enshrouded as if in a veil, and the dissolution of this veil for the candidate occurs at what is termed the process of purification by fire. The first trial is therefore designated as the fire trial, which shall be briefly elucidated as follows. For some individuals, ordinary daily life constitutes a more or less unconscious process of initiation by means of the fire trial. These persons are those who have traversed a multitude of evolutionary experiences, and who discover that their self-confidence, courage, and fortitude have been greatly augmented in a natural manner, who have learned to endure sorrow and disappointment, arising from the failure of their undertakings, with greatness of mind, and especially with quiet and unbroken vigor. Those who have undergone such experiences are frequently initiates, albeit unwittingly, and it requires but a slight impetus to open for them the spiritual hearing and sight, thereby rendering them clairvoyant. For it must be noted that a genuine fire trial is not merely intended to gratify the curiosity of the candidate. He would undoubtedly learn many extraordinary things, of which others, devoid of such experiences, can conceive no idea, yet this knowledge is not the ultimate end nor aim, but merely the path to the end. The true aim and objective is this, that the candidate shall acquire for himself, through this knowledge of the higher worlds, a greater and more authentic self-assurance, a higher and nobler courage, and a perseverance, an attitude of mind, altogether different from that which he could have obtained in the lower world. After the fire trial, a candidate may withdraw from the school, yet because he has advanced thus far, he will execute his mundane vocations greatly strengthened in all his spiritual and physical relations, and, in his subsequent incarnation, he will continue to seek further initiation and advancement. In his present life, at all events, he will demonstrate himself to be a more useful member of society. He will be of greater service to humanity than he was previously. And in whatever position he may find himself, his firmness, prudence, and favorable influence over his fellows will have greatly increased. After emerging from the fire trial, should he elect to persist in the occult school, he must then be instructed in a specific system of inscription employed by those within the school. Occult teachings are recorded in this occult writing system because that which is truly occult can neither be perfectly articulated in words of our ordinary speech nor set forth through ordinary methods of writing. Those who have learned much from the initiates can but partially translate the teachings of occultism into terms of vernacular speech. The symbols or signs of the secret script are not arbitrarily devised or imagined, but correlate with powers which are active and efficacious in nature. It is through these symbols or signs that one masters the language of such matters. The candidate immediately perceives for himself that these symbols correspond to the figures, tones, and colors which he has learned to discern during the periods of probation and enlightenment. He now comprehends that all which preceded was akin to the acquisition of rudimentary orthography, and that only now does he begin to read in the higher worlds. All that appeared to him previously as discrete figures, tones, and colors is now revealed to him as a perfect unity, a coherent harmony, and here, for the first time, he attains an authentic certitude in observing and following the higher knowledge. Hitherto, it was not possible for him to ascertain with finality that what he saw had been clearly or correctly perceived. Now at last it is possible for an accurate understanding to arise between the candidate and the initiate concerning the spheres of the higher worlds, for no matter how intimate the connection between the two may be, no matter what form their intercourse may assume in ordinary life, the initiate can only communicate to the candidate on these planes, in the direct form or figures of the secret alphabet. Through this occult speech, the student also acquires certain precepts of conduct for life, certain duties and obligations of which he previously knew nothing whatsoever. When he learns to internalize these rules, he is able to execute actions which possess a significance and a meaning, such as the actions of another, who is uninitiated, can never possess. The sole vantage point from which he is now able to view things, the only plane from which he can now make manifest his deeds, is that of the higher worlds, and the instructions concerning such deeds can only be read or understood in the secret script. Yet it must be emphatically underscored that there are persons who, unconsciously, possess the faculty or ability to perform these actions, notwithstanding the fact that they have never attended an occult school. Such benefactors of humanity and the world proceed blessedly and beneficently through life. There exist certain fundamental reasons, which cannot be discussed herein, why they are in possession of seemingly supernatural endowments. The sole distinction between these individuals and the disciples of an occult institution lies in the fact that the former operate unconsciously, whereas the latter labor with complete cognizance, insight, sagacity, and comprehension of the entire subject at hand. Frequently, the aspirant must acquire through rigorous discipline that which has been conferred by a higher power upon his counterpart for the welfare of humanity. One ought to freely and overtly venerate these favored children of God. Nevertheless, one must not, on their account, deem the endeavors of the occult schools unessential or superfluous. Now that the scholar has mastered the mystery language, there awaits him yet another ordeal. Through this he must demonstrate whether he can navigate with liberty and certitude within the higher realms. In mundane existence, a man is impelled to action by external motives and conditions. He labors at this task, or that because certain obligations are imposed upon him by external circumstances. It scarcely requires mention that the occult student must in no wise neglect any of the duties associated with his ordinary life, simply because he is a matriculant in an occult school and active in the higher worlds. None of his obligations therein can constrain him to treat with inattention or negligence a single one of his responsibilities in the lower sphere. The father shall remain just as exemplary a progenitor to his family, the mother just as virtuous a matriarch, and neither the officer nor the soldier, nor any other person, shall be detained from their necessary functions because they are students of occultism. On the contrary, all those attributes which render men capable are augmented to a degree of which the uninitiated can form no conception. That this may not invariably appear to be the case is attributable merely to the fact that they do not always possess the capacity to correctly adjudge or critique the initiate. The actions of the latter are not always entirely intelligible to the former. However, as we have previously articulated, this occurs only in specific instances. For him who has arrived at the so-called steps of initiation, there are new obligations to be discharged for which no outer stimulus is provided. He shall be moved to execute these matters by no external pressure, but rather by those canons of conduct which have been communicated to him via the mystery language. In this second trial, he must demonstrate that, guided by such regulations of conduct, he can act from inner promptings with the same firmness with which an officer performs his obligatory duties. For this purpose, the instructor shall set before the pupil certain distinct tasks. The latter must now perform some deed in consequence of observations derived from the totality of what he acquired during probation and enlightenment. He must ascertain the path to that which he is now to perform by means of the mystery language, which by this juncture is familiar to him. If he discerns his duty and executes it correctly, he has withstood the trial, and he recognizes the success which attends the fulfillment of the task by the altered manner in which the spiritual eyes and ears now apprehend figures, tones, and colors. The occult teacher informs him distinctly how these must appear following the consummation of the trial, and the candidate must comprehend how he can effectuate this transformation. This ordeal is designated the water trial because, in consequence of its performance occurring upon the higher planes, that support which would otherwise have been received from outward conditions is now withdrawn. One's movements resemble those executed in water by one learning to swim, and his sensations are those of one possessing no support, save for his own exertions. This practice must be frequently repeated until the candidate attains absolute poise and assurance. These trials are also contingent upon a quality which is engendered by his experiences within the higher worlds. The candidate cultivates this attribute to an extent he could not possibly reach in so brief an interval while developing in the ordinary manner, but could attain only after many incarnations. In order to bring about the transformation herein mentioned, the following condition is requisite. The candidate must be guided entirely by that which has been proven to him through the cultivation of his higher faculties, and by the results of his reading of the secret symbols. Should he, during these experiences, attempt to introduce any of his own opinions or desires, or should he diverge for a single moment from the laws and rules which he has verified as correct, something quite other than that which is anticipated will ensue. In such instances, the candidate loses sight of the objective for which these matters are undertaken, and the result is confusion. He possesses, therefore, manifold opportunities during these trials for the development of self-control, and this, indeed, is the principal quality required. These trials are, consequently, much more easily endured by those who, prior to initiation, have traversed a life which has enabled them to acquire command over themselves. Those who have developed the characteristic of adhering to their higher principles and ideals without thought of personal honor or desire, who always discern the duty to be fulfilled, even though inclinations and sympathies are too often poised to lead them astray, are already unconscious initiates in the midst of everyday life. They require but little to enable them to succeed in the prescribed trials. Indeed, one may posit that a certain measure of initiation, thus unconsciously acquired in life, will be absolutely necessary before entering upon the second trial. For even as many who during youth have not learned to write or spell find much difficulty in learning to do so in later years, so is it also arduous to develop, merely from a knowledge of the higher worlds, the necessary degree of self-control if one has not already acquired a certain measure of it in the course of ordinary life. The entities of the physical world do not alter by merely desiring them to do so, however. In the higher worlds, our wishes, inclinations, and desires are causes that produce effects. If we wish to bring about particular changes in these worlds, we must maintain ourselves in absolute control. We must follow the correct principle and must entirely subdue the personal will. There exists an attribute which at this stage of initiation must be especially considered, a truly robust and assured faculty of judgment. Attention must be directed to the cultivation of this faculty during all the previous stages, and in the course of them, It must be verified whether the candidate has developed this quality sufficiently to render him fit to tread the path of true knowledge. For further progress is now possible only if he is capable of distinguishing illusion, superstition, unsubstantial fancies, and all manner of such phenomena from the true realities. Initially, this is much more difficult to accomplish upon the higher stages of existence than upon the lower. Every prejudice and every cherished opinion regarding these matters, in whatever connection, must be banished. Truth alone must serve as the guide. There must exist a perfect readiness to surrender at once any existing opinion, idea, or inclination when the logical concept demands it. Absolute certainty in the higher worlds can be obtained only when one does not obtrude one's own opinions. Individuals whose mode of thought inclines them toward fantasy, prejudice, and so forth can achieve no progress upon the occult path. Yet be not dismayed. There is, in truth, a glorious treasure that the persistent occult student shall attain. All doubt regarding the higher worlds shall be removed from him. In all their law they shall reveal themselves to his gaze, but so long as he remains blindfolded, he cannot perceive these heights and compensations. It is indeed unfortunate for him if illusions and fallacies ensnare his intellect and reason. Dreamers and persons inclined to fantasies are as unfit for the occult path as are superstitious individuals, for in dreams, illusions, and superstitions lurk the most dangerous adversaries on the road to knowledge. Since the candidate has already beheld upon the portals that open to him the first trial the inscription, "Without normal common sense, all your efforts are in vain," and upon the gateway leading to the second trial the words, "All prejudices must fall away," one need not presume that the capacity for inspiration, enthusiasm, or the poetry of existence is forfeited by the student of occultism. Should he have advanced sufficiently, a third trial now awaits the candidate. Here no objective is defined, nor are any boundary lines demarcated for him. Everything is resigned entirely into his own keeping. He discovers himself in a condition wherein nothing external impels or induces him to action. He must ascertain the path of his own volition and from within his own being. The circumstances or individuals that might formerly have stimulated him to activity are no longer present. Nothing and no one, save he himself, can supply the strength now required. Should he fail to locate this internal fortitude, he will swiftly find himself returned to his former station, however. It must be noted that exceedingly few who have endured the preceding ordeals will fail at this juncture to summon the requisite power. If they have traversed thus far, they shall endure here as well. The sole necessity is the capacity for rapid resolution. For here, in the truest acceptation of the phrase, one must find oneself. In all matters, one must resolve instantly to heed the suggestions and inspirations of the Spirit. There is no time for dubiety or delay. Every moment of hesitation would serve only to demonstrate that one is not yet prepared. Whatever impedes one from perceiving the voice of the Spirit must be boldly vanquished. It is entirely a question of demonstrating presence of mind. Indeed, it is this specific attribute to which attention must be accorded throughout all the antecedent stages of development. All temptations to act, or even to think, which hitherto assailed the individual, must here cease, yet lest he lapse into inaction, he must not relinquish his hold upon himself. For only within himself can he discover that single immutable center point upon which he may rely. No one should harbor an antipathy toward this principle of absolute self-dependence. For him who has endured the trials already described, it indicates the most perfect felicity. In this, as in the stages previously enumerated, everyday existence itself may, for many, serve as an occult school. Those who have attained the capacity to act without delay or personal consideration, and who can form prompt resolutions when suddenly confronted with a task or problem demanding immediate execution, have, in truth, undergone their occult schooling within daily life. The situation one wishes to posit is one wherein successful action is impossible unless the individual concerned comprehends the entire matter and acts simultaneously. He is swift to act when misfortune looms, whereas a moment's hesitation might precipitate a catastrophe, and he who possesses the qualities capable of being developed into a permanent attribute of this nature has already evolved, unknown to himself, the degree of maturity requisite for the third trial. For, as previously observed, at this stage all depends upon the development of presence of mind. In the occult schools, this ordeal is designated the air trial, because while undergoing it, the candidate can support himself neither upon firm ground, nor upon any external cause, nor upon that which he has acquired during probation and enlightenment, neither figures, nor tones, nor colors, but must rely solely upon himself. If the student of the occult has withstood these trials, he is subsequently permitted to enter the temple of the higher wisdom. All that may be said further upon this subject can be conveyed only through the slightest hints and suggestions. The responsibility of the succeeding step has so frequently been poorly expressed in words that many assert the pupil must here swear an oath, promising to betray nothing derived from the teacher. However, these expressions, oath and betrayal, are in no wise appropriate and are, in fact, misleading. It is no oath in the ordinary sense of the term, but is rather an experience that supervenes at this stage. Herein, the candidate appreciates the true value of the occult teachers and their station in the service of humanity. At last, he begins to comprehend the world correctly. It is not so much a question of withholding the higher truths already acquired, but rather of upholding them in the proper manner and with the necessary tact. That concerning which one learns to observe silence is a matter altogether different. One gains possession of this refined attribute regarding many subjects of which one had previously spoken, and especially regarding the manner in which one had discoursed upon them. Yet he would be a poor initiate who did not place all his mystical experiences as adequately and as comprehensively as possible at the service of humanity. The sole obstacle in such matters is the misunderstanding of the individual receiving the communication. Above all, the higher or occult secrets may not be discussed promiscuously, however. To no one who has passed the stages of development heretofore described is it actually forbidden to speak of these matters. No one is required to swear a negative oath. Rather, everything is entrusted to the judgment, integrity, and sense of responsibility of the candidate for initiation. What one truly learns is to ascertain, within oneself, what ought to be done under all circumstances, and the oath signifies nothing more than this, that one is found qualified to be entrusted with matters of such import. If the candidate is found fit, he is then proffered what is symbolically termed the draft of forgetfulness. This implies that he will be initiated into the secret knowledge enabling him to act without being continually disturbed by the lower memory. This is absolutely essential for the initiate, for he must possess full faith in the immediate present. He must be capable of destroying that veil of memory which extends itself around humanity, growing ever denser with every moment of life. If one judges events occurring today by the experiences of yesterday, one is subjected to a multitude of errors. Naturally, it is not intended that the reader should renounce all experience acquired in life. He ought always to retain it in mind as firmly as possible. However, as an initiate, one must acquire the ability to judge every fresh experience irrespective of oneself, unclouded by all bygone events. One must be prepared at every moment for a new object or being to bring to one a new revelation. If one judges the new by the standard of the old, one necessarily falls into error. The memory of past experiences is, however, highly beneficial, for it renders one better able to perceive the new. If one had not undergone a specific experience, one would probably not have perceived the attributes of this or that being or object. Yet, having possessed such experiences, one ought to be enabled to discern the new without judging it by the old. In this manner, the initiate obtains certain definite qualities, and by means of these, many things are revealed to him, while they remain concealed from the uninitiated. The second draft proffered to the initiate is the draft of remembrance. By receiving this, he becomes capable of maintaining the higher secrets ever present within the soul. Ordinary memory would not suffice to ensure this. He must be absolutely at one with the higher truths. He must not merely know them, but be able, as a matter of course, to manifest and administer them in living actions, even as an ordinary man eats and drinks. They must become one's practice, one's inclinations, one's habits. It must be unnecessary to recall them to mind. They must become a part of oneself and express themselves through one's very being. They must flow through one, just as the life currents circulate through one's bodily organism. Thus must we render ourselves as perfect in a spiritual sense as nature has rendered us in a physical one. Chapter 7. Educating the soul. Should an individual cultivate his intellect, sentiments, and emotions in the manner previously elucidated within the chapters concerning probation, enlightenment, and initiation, he subsequently engenders a transformation within his soul analogous to that which nature has wrought upon his physical form. Antecedent to this discipline, the soul and spirit exist as undifferentiated aggregates. In such a condition, the clairvoyant perceives them as interlacing nebulosities, rotating spirally and typically possessing a lusterless glimmer of reddish or reddish-brown coloration, or, perchance, of reddish-yellow, however. Following this maturation, they commence to assume a brilliant yellowish-green or yellow-blue hue and acquire a symmetrical structure. an individual attains such structural regularity and simultaneously the higher knowledge when he introduces into the domain of his thoughts, feelings, and emotions an order comparable to that which nature has established within his corporeal organs, by means of which he is enabled to see, hear, digest, breathe, speak, and so forth. Gradually, the student learns, as it were, to respire, to perceive with the soul, and to articulate and listen with the spirit. In the subsequent pages, a few of the practical considerations pertaining to the higher education of the soul and spirit shall be expounded upon more comprehensively. These are of a nature that may be practically achieved by any individual without supplementary instruction, and through which a further advancement in occult science may be realized. A specific mode of discipline must be patiently attempted, such that one avoids every sentiment of impatience, for it produces a paralyzing, indeed, even a deadening effect upon the higher faculties within us. One must not anticipate that immeasurable glimpses of the higher worlds will unfold before one from day to day, for assuredly, as a general rule, this does not transpire. Contentment with the most minute progress, repose, and tranquility must increasingly possess the soul. It is conceivable, naturally, that the learner may impatiently await results. However, he shall attain nothing so long as he fails to master this impatience. Nor is it of any avail to struggle against this impatience in the customary manner, for then it shall only become more potent than ever. It is thus that individuals deceive themselves, for in such an instance it embeds itself all the more firmly in the profundities of the soul. It is only by repeatedly surrendering oneself to a single definite thought, and by appropriating it absolutely as one's own, that anything is genuinely attained. One should contemplate, I must certainly do everything possible for the culture of soul and spirit, yet I shall work tranquilly until, by higher powers, I shall be deemed worthy of definite illumination. When this thought has become so potent within an individual that it constitutes an actual trait in his character, he is treading the correct path. This trait shall then manifest itself even in external affairs. The gaze of the eye becomes tranquil, the movements of the body become assured, the resolutions defined, and all that we designate as nervous susceptibility gradually vanishes. Rules that appear trifling and insignificant must be taken into account. For example, let us suppose that someone affronts us. Prior to receiving this occult education, we would have directed our resentment against the transgressor. There would have been an upsurge of ire within us. Yet, in such a case, the occult student shall reflect. An affront of this nature can effect no difference to my worth, and whatever must be executed to address the affront, he accomplishes with calm and composure, rather than with passion. To him, it is not a question of how an affront is to be endured, but without hesitation, he is led to ignore or punish the affront to his own person in precisely the same manner as if it had been offered to another, in which instance one possesses the right to resent or disregard it. It must always be remembered, however, that occult training is perfected not by coarse external processes, but by subtle, silent alterations in the life of thought and emotion. Patience exercises an attractive, while impatience exercises a repellent, effect upon the treasures of higher knowledge. In the higher regions of being, nothing can be attained through haste and restlessness. Desire and longing for immediate results must be silenced, for these are qualities of the soul before which all higher knowledge recedes. However precious this knowledge may be accounted, one must not desire to anticipate the time of its arrival. Furthermore, he who wishes to possess it for his own sake alone shall never attain it. It is absolutely mandated that one be true to oneself in one's innermost soul. One must not there be deceived by anything. One must encounter face to face and with absolute veracity one's own faults, failings, and inadequacies. The moment one attempts to excuse to oneself any one of one's weaknesses, one places an obstacle in the path which leads upward. There exists but one method by which to eliminate such obstacles. Our faults and weaknesses can be removed only by self-illumination, and that is by correctly comprehending them. All that is required lies latent within the human soul and may be evoked. An individual immediately ameliorates his understanding and his reason when in repose he clarifies to himself why he is weak in any respect. Self-knowledge of this nature is naturally difficult, for the temptation to deceive oneself is immeasurably great. He who is accustomed to being truthful with himself has opened the portals into a deeper insight. All curiosity must fall away from the student. He must wean himself as much as possible from inquiries into matters of which he wishes to know solely for the gratification of his personal thirst for superficial information. He must ask himself only what things will assist him in the perfection of his innermost being for the service of the general evolution. Nevertheless, his delight in knowledge and his devotion to it must in no degree become relaxed. He must listen devoutly to all that contributes to such an end, and should seek every opportunity of doing so. For this interior culture, it is especially necessary that the desire life be carefully educated. One must not become wholly destitute of desire, for if we are to accomplish something, it is necessary that we should desire it, and a desire will always be fulfilled if a certain special force resides behind it. This particular force results from a right knowledge. Harbor no desire whatsoever until the true conditions of any sphere are known. That is one of the golden rules for the occult student. The wise man first ascertains the laws of the world, and subsequently his desires become powers which realize themselves. Let us consider an example wherein the effect is evident. There are certainly many who would desire to learn from their own intuition something concerning their life prior to birth. Such a desire is altogether aimless, and leads to no result so long as the person in question has not acquired a knowledge of the laws that govern the nature of the eternal, and a knowledge of them in their subtlest and most intimate character. However, if he has actually acquired this knowledge and subsequently wishes to proceed onward, he is able to do so by means of his elevated and purified desire. Moreover, it is of no utility to say to oneself, "Yes, I will forthwith examine my previous life and study with that aim in view." One must rather be prepared to abandon such desire, to eliminate it altogether, and first of all, to learn without consideration of this aim. One should cultivate devotion to knowledge without regard to desires. It is only then that one enters into possession of the desire which we are considering in a manner that leads to its own fulfillment. From one's anger or vexation arises an adverse condition in the spiritual world, such that those forces which would open the eyes of the soul are turned away. For example, if someone should annoy me, he projects a current into the world of the soul. So long as I allow myself to be annoyed, I cannot perceive this current. My own annoyance obscures it, yet from this it must not be supposed that when I no longer feel annoyed, I shall behold the astral vision. To perceive an astral vision, it is indispensable that the eye of the soul be previously developed. Nevertheless, the capacity for such vision remains latent within every individual. Furthermore, it is undeniably true that throughout this development, so long as one remains susceptible to annoyance, the faculty of sight remains dormant, nor does it manifest immediately upon the partial conquest of this irritation. One must steadfastly persevere in the struggle against such emotions and proceed with patience. Ultimately, one shall discover that this eye of the soul has attained full maturity. Naturally, annoyance is not the sole attribute against which one must contend before achieving this objective. Numerous individuals become impatient or skeptical, having cultivated specific qualities of the soul for years without the subsequent emergence of clairvoyance. They have fostered but a few virtues while permitting others to flourish unchecked. The gift of clairvoyance manifests only when all those characteristics impeding the development of latent faculties are thoroughly suppressed. Undoubtedly, the incipient stages of such hearing and seeing may emerge at an earlier juncture, however. These are merely tender shoots subject to every conceivable error, and should they lack careful cultivation, they may swiftly perish. The qualities that must be combated, in addition to anger and vexation, include ambition, timidity, curiosity, superstition, conceit, the malady of prejudice, an idle penchant for gossip, and the drawing of distinctions regarding human beings based upon merely external attributes of rank, sex, race, and so forth. In our present era, it is arduous for individuals to comprehend that the subjugation of such qualities possesses any correlation with an augmented capacity for knowledge. Yet every devotee of occultism is cognizant that far more depends upon such matters than upon the expansion of the intellect or the employment of artificial exercises. It is particularly easy for a misunderstanding of this point to arise, inasmuch as many believe that one should cultivate foolhardiness under the guise of fearlessness, and that one should entirely ignore the distinctions among men in the effort to combat prejudices of race, rank, and the like. Rather, one ought first to learn to appreciate these differences with exactitude. Only then is one no longer entangled in prejudice. Even in the conventional sense, it is true that fear of any phenomenon hinders one from estimating it correctly, just as racial prejudice precludes one from gazing into a man's soul. The student of occultism must bring his common sense to perfection in all its exactitude and subtlety. Indeed, everything a man articulates without clear and prior contemplation will place an obstacle upon the path of his occult education. Concurrently, we must here consider a point which can only be elucidated through the provision of an example. Thus, should anyone make a statement to which another must reply, the respondent should be scrupulous in considering the intention, the feelings, and even the prejudices of that individual, rather than merely what he wishes to say at the moment regarding the subject under discussion. In other words, the student must apply himself keenly to the cultivation of a certain refined tact. He must learn to adjudicate how significant it may be to this other person should his opinion be opposed. It must not be imagined for a moment that he ought, for this reason, to withhold his own opinion. One must accord the questioner as careful a hearing as possible, and from what one has gathered, formulate one's own reply. In such instances, a certain thought will constantly recur to the student, and he treads the true path if this thought becomes so vital within him that it evolves into a trait of his character. The thought is as follows: "It matters little whether my view differs from his. The vital point is whether he will discover the correct view for himself if I am able to contribute something toward it." Through thoughts of such a nature, the mode of action and the character of the student will become permeated with gentleness, one of the most essential qualities for the reception of occult instruction. Harshness obscures that internal image which ought to be evoked by the eye of the soul, whereas through gentleness, many obstacles are cleared from the path, and the inner organs are opened. Concomitant with this gentleness, another trait will presently be developed within the soul. He will formulate a quiet estimation of all the subtleties in the soul life surrounding him, without regarding the emotions of his own soul. And if this condition has been attained, the soul emotions and the environment of others will exert such an effect upon him that the soul within him grows, and, in growing, becomes organized, much as a plant expands in the sunlight. Gentleness, quiet reserve, and true patience open the soul to the world of souls, and the spirit to the realm of spirits. Persevere in repose and retirement. Close the senses to that which they conveyed to you before you commenced your training. Bring into utter stillness all those thoughts which, in accordance with your previous habits, were tossed to and fro within you. Become entirely still and silent within. Wait in patience, and subsequently, the tranquil higher worlds will begin to develop the sight of your soul and the hearing of your spirit. Do not suppose that you will immediately perceive and hear in the worlds of soul and spirit, for all that you are undertaking serves merely to assist the development of your higher senses, and you shall not be able to see with the soul nor hear with the spirit before you have, to some degree, acquired those very senses. When you have persevered for a time in repose and retirement, then proceed with your daily affairs, having first impressed upon your mind the thought, "Someday, when I am ready, I shall attain that which I am destined to attain." Finally, make no attempt whatsoever to attract any of these higher powers to yourself by an effort of the will. These are instructions which every occult student receives from his instructor at the entrance of the path. If he observes them, he thereby perfects himself, and if he does not observe them, all his labor is in vain, yet they are difficult of achievement only for him who lacks patience and perseverance. No other obstacles exist save those which one erects for oneself, and these may be avoided by anyone if he truly wills it. It is necessary to continually insist upon this point, because many individuals form an altogether erroneous conception of the difficulty that lies in the path of occultism. In a certain sense, it is easier to accomplish the earlier steps of the occult way than it is for one who has received no instruction to surmount the difficulties of everyday life. In addition to this, it must be understood that only such matters are here imparted as are attended by no danger to the health of soul or body. There exist certain other paths which lead more precipitously to the goal, but it is not prudent to treat of them publicly, for they may sometimes induce certain effects upon a man which would necessitate the immediate intervention of an experienced teacher, and in any case would require his continual supervision. Now, as information concerning these more expeditious methods frequently forces itself into publicity, it becomes necessary to issue an express warning against entering upon them without personal guidance. For reasons which only the initiated can comprehend, it will never be possible to provide public instruction concerning these other methods in their true form. Furthermore, the fragments which here and there make their appearance can never lead to anything profitable, but may easily result in the undermining of health, fortune, and peace of mind. He who does not wish to place himself under the dominion of certain dark forces, of whose nature and origin he may know nothing, had far better avoid meddling in such matters. Something may here be added concerning the environment in which the practices of occult instruction ought to be undertaken. This is of paramount importance, although for almost every individual the circumstances differ. He who pursues his practice within an environment replete with self-serving interests, exemplified by the modern struggle for existence, must ascertain that these external forces remain without influence upon the evolution of his spiritual organs. Admittedly, the intrinsic laws governing these faculties possess such potency that any such influence is rendered incapable of inflicting fatal injury. Precisely as a lily, regardless of the incongruity of the environment in which it is situated, can never transmute into a thistle, so too the eye of the soul can never evolve into anything other than its preordained destiny, notwithstanding its subjection to the myriad adverse influences of modernity. Nevertheless, it is beneficial if, under all circumstances, the student intermittently seeks for his surroundings the tranquility, the intrinsic dignity, and the sweetness of nature herself. Particularly propitious are the circumstances of one who is privileged to pursue his occult studies within the verdant realm of flora, amidst sun-drenched peaks, or amongst the delightful interplay of elemental simplicities. Such an environment cultivates the inner organs with a degree of harmony that is arduous to attain amidst the cacophony and commercialism of a modern metropolis. He is, furthermore, more advantageously situated than the strict urbanite, provided that he, at least during his childhood, was permitted to inhale the fragrance of the pines, to gaze upon the snow-capped summits, or to observe the silent industry of woodland creatures and insects. Yet, no individual compelled to reside within a city should neglect to provide his evolving soul and spirit with the sustenance derived from the inspired utterances of the mighty teachers of humanity. He, who is unable, with each returning springtime, to observe the daily unfolding of the verdant forest, ought in lieu thereof to imbibe into his heart the sublime doctrines of the Bhagavad Gita, of St. John's Gospel, or of Thomas à Kempis. Diverse pathways exist leading to the summit of insight, yet a judicious selection is of inestimable value. The adept in occultism could, in truth, expound at length regarding these paths, much that might appear peculiar to an uninitiated auditor. By way of illustration, let us postulate that an individual has progressed far along the occult path and, remaining wholly oblivious to his proximity, stands at the threshold of the sight of the soul and the hearing of the spirit. Subsequently, he possesses the good fortune to pass peacefully into its very presence, whereupon a veil falls away from the eyes of his soul. Instantaneously he perceives his vision is attained. Another, perchance, has advanced to such an extent that this restriction requires merely to be loosened, and by some stroke of destiny, this eventuation occurs. For a different individual, this very stroke might actively possess the effect of paralyzing his faculties and undermining his vitality, yet for the occult student it becomes the occasion of his enlightenment. Perhaps a third has patiently persevered for years, absent any conspicuous result. Suddenly, whilst tranquilly ensconced in his quiet chamber, light envelops him, the walls become transparent, they vanish into the ether, and a new world expands before his opened eyes or becomes audible to his awakened spirit. Chapter 8. Rules for Discipleship. The prerequisites for admission into an occult school are not of a character to be arbitrarily formulated by any individual. Rather, they constitute the intrinsic consequences of occult erudition. Precisely as an individual shall never become a painter, should he decline to wield a brush, so too can no one obtain occult instruction if he remains indisposed to satisfy the stipulations advanced by the occult preceptor. In truth, the instructor can impart nothing save counsel, and it is in this capacity that every utterance he articulates ought to be regarded. He has already traversed the probationary path conducting to the comprehension of higher planes. Through experience, he ascertains that which is requisite, and it depends entirely upon the free will of each specific individual whether or not he elects to pursue that identical course. Were anyone to solicit occult training from an instructor without intending to satisfy the conditions, such a requisition would be tantamount to declaring, "Instruct me in the art of painting, yet do not request that I manipulate a brush." The occult preceptor never advances a single step further, unless it be in strict accordance with the volition of the recipient. It must be underscored that a generalized aspiration for higher knowledge is insufficient, yet many shall likely possess merely such a tenuous desire. For him who harbors merely this nebulous notion, and is unprepared to accept the specific stipulations of the occult mentor, the latter, for the interim, can effect nothing. This ought to be borne in mind by those who lament that occult instructors do not meet them halfway. He who cannot, or will not, fulfill the rigorous conditions required must for the time being relinquish occult training. It is true that the conditions are indeed arduous, yet they are not harsh, inasmuch as their fulfillment not only ought to be, but must be, a wholly voluntary act. To him who fails to recall this, it is facile for the requirements of the occult teacher to appear as a coercion of the soul or the conscience, for the training herein mentioned is founded upon a development of the interior life, and it is the function of the teacher to offer counsel concerning it. And yet, if something be demanded as the result of free choice, it cannot be regarded as a fetter. If anyone says to the instructor, "Grant me your secrets, but leave me my customary sentiments and thoughts," he is then issuing an impossible demand. Such an individual desires nothing more than to satisfy his curiosity and thirst for sensation consequently. By one who adopts an attitude such as this, occult knowledge can never be acquired. Let us now contemplate, in their proper sequence, the conditions of discipleship. It should be emphasized that the complete fulfillment of any one of these conditions is by no means demanded, but solely the endeavor to achieve such fulfillment. No one can initially attain these lofty ideals, yet the path which conducts to their realization may be entered by everyone. It is the will that signifies, the attitude assumed when embarking upon the path. The first condition is the directing of one's attention toward the advancement of bodily and spiritual health. Naturally, discipleship does not primarily depend upon a man's health. Nevertheless, everyone can endeavor to ameliorate his condition in this respect, and only from a healthy man may proceed a salutary perception. No occult instructor would reject a man who is unwell, yet it is required that the pupils should possess the desire for a healthy existence. In this regard, he must attain the greatest possible independence. The benevolent counsels of others, which, though generally unsought, are received by everyone, are as a rule superfluous. Each must endeavor to care for himself. From the physical aspect, it will be more a matter of warding off deleterious influences than of any other concern. For in the execution of one's duty, one is often compelled to perform actions which are disadvantageous to health. One must learn how, at the appropriate juncture, to place duty above the care of health, yet with a modicum of goodwill. What is there that cannot be forgone? Duty must in many instances be accounted superior to health. Indeed, if need be, superior to life itself, however. The disciple must never rank pleasure as high as either one of these. Pleasure, for him, can act only as a means to health and life, and in respect to this, it is absolutely necessary that we should be entirely honest and truthful with ourselves. It is of no avail to lead an ascetic existence, so long as it is born of motives akin to those that engender other enjoyments. There are individuals who find satisfaction in asceticism, as do others in wine-bibbing, but they must not imagine that asceticism of this variety will assist them to attain the higher knowledge. Many ascribe to their unfavorable circumstances everything which apparently precludes them from making progress in this direction. They assert that, given their conditions of life, they cannot develop themselves to any significant extent. For other reasons, it may be desirable for many to alter their conditions of life, yet no one need do so for the specific purpose of occult training. For this, it is only necessary that one should do for one's health as much as one finds possible within the position one occupies. Every variety of labor may serve the whole of humanity, and it is a surer indication of greatness in the human soul to perceive clearly how necessary for the aggregate is a petty, perhaps even an unlovely, employment, than to think, "This work is not sufficiently good for me, I am destined for something else." It is especially important for the disciple to strive after complete spiritual health. In any event, an unhealthy emotional or intellectual life diverts one from the path of higher knowledge. The foundations herein consist of clear, tranquil thinking, reliable conceptions, and stable sentiments. Nothing should be more alien to the disciple than an inclination toward a whimsical, excitable existence, toward nervousness, intoxication, and fanaticism. He should acquire a salutary perspective on all circumstances of life. He should traverse life steadily and should permit things to act upon him and speak to him in all tranquility. Wherever it is possible, he should endeavor to do justice to life. Everything in his tastes and criticisms which is unilateral or extravagant ought to be eschewed. If this be not so, the disciple shall strand himself in a world of his own imagination, instead of attaining the higher worlds, and in the place of truth, his own favored opinions shall assert themselves. It is preferable for the disciple to be matter-of-fact rather than overwrought and fanciful. The second condition is that one should perceive oneself as a link in the general life. Much is included in the fulfillment of this condition, yet each can only fulfill it after his own manner. If I am a schoolmaster and my pupil does not answer what is desired of him, I must first direct my feeling not against the pupil, but toward myself. I ought to feel myself so much at one with my pupil that I inquire of myself, may not that in the pupil which fails to satisfy my demand be, perhaps, the result of my own deficiencies? Or if perchance it be his unconscious or even vicious error, as his instructor, instead of directing my feelings against him, I shall rather cogitate upon the manner in which I myself ought to behave, or in kindness demonstrate to him what is right, so that he may in the future be better able to satisfy my requirements. From such a mode of thinking there will gradually ensue a transformation over the entire mental attitude. This holds true for the smallest as well as for the greatest matters. From this vantage point, I regard a criminal, for instance, altogether differently from the manner in which I should have regarded him of old. I suspend my judgment and reflect inwardly. I am merely a man, just as he is. Perhaps the education which, owing to favorable circumstances, has been mine, and nothing else, has preserved me from a similar fate. I may even arrive at the conclusion that if the instructors who took pains with me had done the same for him, this brother of mine would have been quite different. I shall contemplate the fact that a privilege withheld from him has been bestowed upon me, and that I may, perchance, owe my own virtue to the circumstance that he has been thus deprived of it. Subsequently, it will no longer prove arduous to apprehend the conception that I function as a constituent link within the totality of humanity, and that consequently I, too, in partial measure, bear accountability for all that transpires. By this, it is not implied that such a cogitation should be translated immediately into externalized action. Rather, it ought to be quietly cultivated within the soul. It will thenceforth manifest itself gradually in the individual's outward deportment, and in such matters one can commence only by reforming oneself. From such a standpoint, it were futile to proffer general claims upon all of humanity. While it is facile to formulate an idea of what mankind ought to be, the disciple labors not upon the surface, but within the profundities. Therefore, it would be erroneous to endeavor to correlate these demands of the occult instructor with any external or political assertions. As a general rule, political agitators are well versed in what may be demanded of others, yet they speak little regarding demands placed upon themselves. Now, with these self-imposed demands, the third condition for occult training is intimately connected. The student must be capable of realizing the concept that his thoughts and sentiments hold as much import for the world as his deeds. It must be acknowledged that it is as pernicious to harbor hatred for a fellow being as it is to strike him. One may then discern that by perfecting oneself, one achieves something not merely for oneself, but for the entire world. The world benefits from pure thoughts and sentiments as significantly as from one's exemplary conduct. So long as one cannot place faith in this global significance of the inner self, one remains unfit for discipleship. One becomes permeated with a true conception of the soul's significance only when one labors upon this inner self, as though it were, at the very least, as critical as all external phenomena. It must be conceded that one's feelings produce an effect equal to the action of the hand. In stating this, we have already alluded to the fourth condition, the notion that the true being of man resides not in the exterior, but in the interior. He, who regards himself merely as a product of the outer sphere, a result of the physical world, cannot succeed in this occult training. However, he who is able to realize this conception is subsequently able to distinguish between inner duty and external success. He learns to recognize that the former cannot be immediately measured by the latter. The student must ascertain for himself the correct equilibrium between that which is demanded by his external circumstances and that which he recognizes as the appropriate conduct for himself. He ought not to impose upon his environment anything for which it lacks appreciation, yet simultaneously he must remain altogether free from the desire to perform merely that which can be appreciated by those surrounding him. Within his own sincere and wisdom-seeking soul, and solely there, must he seek the recognition of his truths. Conversely, from his environment he must acquire as much knowledge as possible, so that he may discern what those around him require and what is of utility to them. In this manner, he will develop within himself what is known in occultism as the spiritual balance. On one side of the scales rests a heart open to the necessities of the outward world, and on the other rests an inner fortitude and an unfaltering endurance. Herein, again, we have alluded to the fifth condition, firmness in the execution of any resolution once it has been established. Nothing should induce the disciple to deviate from such a resolution once formed, save only the perception that he has committed an error. Every resolution constitutes a force, and even if such a force does not produce an immediate effect upon the point to which it was directed, it nevertheless operates in its own manner. Success is of substantial import only when an action arises from desire, however. All actions rooted in desire are worthless in relation to the higher worlds. Therein, the love expended upon an action is solely of importance. Within this love, all that impels the student to perform an action ought to be implanted. Thus, he will never grow weary of repeatedly executing some resolution in action, even though he has failed on numerous occasions. In this manner, he arrives at a state wherein he does not rely primarily upon the external effect of his actions, but is contented with the mere performance of them. He will learn to sacrifice his actions for the world, nay more, his entire being, without regard for how his sacrifice may be received. He who wishes to become a disciple must declare himself prepared for such a sacrifice, such an offering. A sixth condition is the cultivation of a sense of gratitude regarding everything which relates to man. One must realize that one's existence is, as it were, a gift from the entire universe. Consider only all that is necessitated in order that each of us may receive and maintain his existence. Consider that which we owe to nature and to those other than ourselves. Those who desire occult training must be inclined toward such contemplations, for he who cannot enter into these thoughts will be incapable of developing within himself that all-inclusive love requisite for attaining higher knowledge. That which we do not love cannot manifest itself unto us. Every manifestation must imbue us with gratitude, or else we ourselves are not enriched by it. All the conditions herein set forth must be united in a seventh, to regard life continually in the manner demanded by these stipulations. The student thus renders it possible to impress upon his life the stamp of uniformity. All his manifold modes of expression will, in this way, be brought into harmony and cease to contradict one another. Thus he will prepare himself for the peace which he must attain during the preliminary stages of his training. If a person intends, earnestly and sincerely, to fulfill the aforementioned conditions, he may then address himself to a teacher of occultism. The latter will then be found prepared to offer the initial words of counsel. Any external formality will consist of giving these conditions a complete expression, a knowledge of which can only be imparted orally to each individual candidate. Since everything interior must manifest itself in an exterior manner, they impart a most significant lesson. Even as a painting cannot be said to be present when it exists solely in the mind of the painter, so too can there be no occult training without an external expression. External forms are regarded as worthless only by those who do not comprehend that the internal must find expression within the external. It is true that it is the spirit, and not the form, that truly matters, however, just as the form is void without the spirit. So would the spirit remain inactive so long as it could not create a form. The stipulated conditions are designed such that they may render the disciple sufficiently robust to fulfill the further demands which the teacher must impose. If he be faulty in the fulfillment of these conditions, then before each new demand he shall stand in hesitation. Without this fulfillment, he will be lacking in that faith in man which is necessary for him to possess. For upon faith in man and a genuine love for man, all striving after truth must be founded, and the love of man must be slowly expanded into a love for all living creatures, nay, indeed, for all existence. He who fails to fulfill the conditions provided herein will possess neither a perfect love for all upbuilding and all creation, nor a tendency to abstain from all destruction and annihilation as such. The disciple must so train himself that not merely in deeds, but also in words, thoughts, and feelings, he will never destroy anything for the sake of destruction. He must derive his gratification from the generative and creative facets of existence, and is justified in aiding the apparent dissolution of any entity only when, through such reconfiguration, he is capable of fostering a superior vitality. Let it not be surmised that, by this assertion, it is implied that the disciple may countenance the victory of malevolence. Rather, it implies that he must strive to discern, even within the nefarious, those elements through which he may transmute it into the benevolent. He shall perceive with increasing lucidity that the paramount method for combating imperfection and iniquity lies in the generation of the perfect and the virtuous. The student is cognizant that nothing can emerge from nothingness, yet he is equally aware that the imperfect is susceptible to transmutation into the perfect. He who cultivates within himself the propensity to create will unmistakably discover the capacity to confront malevolence. Whosoever enters an esoteric fraternity must be thoroughly assured that his intent is to construct and not to demolish. The student ought, consequently, to bring with him the volition for sincere and dedicated labor, and to this end he must be capable of profound devotion, for one should be eager to acquire knowledge of that which remains unknown, and he should gaze reverently upon that which reveals itself. Labor and devotion, these constitute the fundamental attributes which must be exacted from the disciple. Certain individuals will be compelled to discover that they achieve no genuine advancement within the school, even if, in their own estimation, they are unceasingly active, because they have not apprehended, in the correct manner, the significance of labor and meditation. That species of erudition undertaken bereft of meditation shall advance the student the least, and labor performed for self-serving remuneration shall prove the least successful. Within the love of labor, the passion to perform superior work, indeed, the ardor to execute perfect work, lies the quality that unfurls occult power. And in qualifying for superior states, one need pay scant heed to greater recompense. If the learner seeks salutary thoughts and sound judgment, he need not taint his devotion with skepticism and suspicion. The circumstance that one offers no opposition to a specific communication, but rather accords it due attention and even sympathy, does not imply a deficiency of independent judgment. Those who have attained a somewhat advanced stage of enlightenment are cognizant that they owe all to a tranquil attention and assimilation, and not to an obstinate personal adjudication. One should invariably recall that he requires no instruction in that which he is already capable of comprehending. Therefore, if one desires solely to adjudicate, he is prone to the cessation of learning. What is of consequence in an occult school, however, is study. One ought to desire, with heart and soul, to exist as a student. If one cannot comprehend a matter, it is far preferable not to pass judgment, lest one wrongly condemn. It is far more sagacious to await a true understanding. The higher one ascends the ladder of knowledge, the more he requires this faculty of tranquil and devotional listening. All perception of verities, all existence and activity in the realm of spirit, become in these elevated regions delicate and subtle in comparison with the operations of the ordinary intellect and of life in the corporeal sphere. The more the sphere of a man's activity expands before him, the more transcendent is the nature of the undertaking to be accomplished by him. It is for this reason that, although there exists in reality only one possible fact regarding the higher verities, men come to regard them from such divergent vantage points. It is possible to arrive at this singular true standpoint if, through labor and devotion, one has so ascended that he can genuinely behold the truth. Only he who adjudicates in accordance with preconceived notions and habitual modes of thought, rather than from sufficient preparation, can arrive at any opinion that deviates from the true one. Just as there exists only one correct conclusion concerning a mathematical problem, so too is it with regard to matters of the higher worlds, yet, before one can arrive at this knowledge, he must first prepare himself. Truth and the higher existence do indeed abide in every human soul, and it is veracious that everyone can and must, sooner or later, discover them for himself.